When a single father's coffee mug shatters on his CEO's office floor, it's not just ceramic breaking, it's 3 years of carefully constructed emotional armor crumbling in seconds. Ryan Carter thought he had his life figured out. Keep your head down, raise your daughter, never let anyone close enough to hurt you again. Then Ava Sinclair, his billionaire boss, held his trembling hand and asked one terrifying question that changed everything. If you want to see how a man paralyzed by loss finds the courage to risk his heart again, stay until the end. Drop a like and comment your city so I can see how far this story travels. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. Ryan Carter's alarm clock died at 5:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, which meant he woke up at 6:15 instead, which meant Sophie would be late for school, which meant his entire day was already circling the drain before he'd even opened his eyes. "Dad!" Sophie's voice cut through the bedroom door. "Dad, I can't find my science folder." He rolled out of bed, his back protesting the movement. 32 wasn't supposed to feel like 50, but 3 years of single parenthood had a way of aging you in places that didn't show. The apartment was small, 2 bedrooms in a building that had seen better decades, but it was theirs, and that was enough. Had to be enough. "Check your backpack," he called back, pulling on yesterday's jeans because clean laundry was a tomorrow problem. "I already did." Ryan found the folder wedged behind the couch cushions, along with 2 hair ties, a granola bar wrapper, and a toy car he didn't remember buying. Sophie was 7 years old and somehow capable of losing things in places that defied physics. "Got it," he said, holding up the folder like a trophy. Sophie looked up from her cereal, Lucky Charms, because he'd lost the battle for healthy breakfast 6 months ago, and grinned. She had her mother's smile, the kind that could punch right through whatever walls you'd built. Dark hair pulled into a messy ponytail, purple shirt already stained with milk, missing her left sock even though he'd watched her put both on 10 minutes ago. "You're a superhero," she said. "I'm really not." "Mom always said you were." And there it was. 3 years gone, and Emma still walked into conversations like she'd just stepped out to the store. Ryan's chest tightened the way it always did, but he kept his face neutral. Sophie watched him sometimes, looking for cracks, and he refused to give her any. "Eat your cereal," he said. "We're already late." The drive to Riverside Elementary took 12 minutes, which gave him 11 minutes to listen to Sophie explain, in exhaustive detail, why her friend Madison was wrong about dolphins being smarter than dogs, and 1 minute to realize he'd forgotten to pack her lunch. "I've got lunch money," Sophie said when he apologized for the 3rd time. "It's okay, Dad." But it wasn't okay. It was never okay. He kept a mental scoreboard of his failures, and this morning was already racking up points. He worked at Sinclair Industries, a tech company that had somehow survived the startup bloodbath and emerged as one of the biggest players in cloud infrastructure. Ryan didn't fully understand what the company did, something about data management and predictive analytics, but he understood his job well enough. Operations coordinator, which was corporate speak for the guy who makes sure things don't fall apart. He was good at it. Good at anticipating problems, good at staying invisible, good at keeping his head down. In 3 years, he'd missed exactly 2 days of work, both times because Sophie had strep throat. His performance reviews were always the same: reliable, efficient, meets expectations. He'd built his entire life around meeting expectations and nothing more. The Sinclair Industries headquarters sat in the renovated downtown district, all glass and steel and architectural ambition. Ryan's desk was on the 4th floor, tucked into a corner of the operations bay where he could see the entire room without being seen. He liked it that way. "Morning, Carter," said Marcus Chen, dropping into the chair beside him. Marcus was maybe 25, fresh out of some prestigious university. The kind of guy who wore expensive sneakers and talked about disrupting the paradigm without irony. "You see the email?" Ryan hadn't seen the email. He'd been too busy scraping toothpaste off the bathroom mirror. "Which one?" "The retreat. This weekend. Some team-building thing up at Lake Harmony." Marcus made air quotes around team building like the concept personally offended him. "Mandatory fun. My favorite." Ryan pulled up the email, his stomach sinking with each line. 2 days, Friday through Sunday. Rustic cabins, trust exercises, a keynote from the CEO herself about fostering authentic workplace connections. "I can't do weekends," Ryan said. "Nobody can do weekends. That's why they're weekends." Marcus spun his chair in a lazy circle. But apparently Ava Sinclair thinks we all need to get in touch with our inner team players or whatever. Ava Sinclair. Ryan had seen her exactly 4 times in 3 years. Once at his initial interview, which she hadn't conducted but had stopped by for reasons he never understood. Once at a company-wide meeting where she'd talked about quarterly projections in a voice that made spreadsheets sound almost interesting. Once in the elevator, where they'd stood in silence for 8 floors while he tried not to stare. And once in the parking garage, where she'd been having an animated phone conversation in what sounded like French. She was 30 years old and ran a company worth billions. She wore suits that probably cost more than his car, and had the kind of presence that made rooms rearrange themselves around her. Dark hair always pulled back, sharp features that looked carved rather than born, eyes that saw straight through whatever mask you were wearing. Ryan avoided her the way you avoid lightning, not out of fear exactly, but out of a healthy respect for things that could obliterate you without trying. "I'll send a decline," he said. "You can't decline mandatory." Marcus was already pulling up the RSVP form. "Trust me, I tried." HR sent back a very polite email explaining that mandatory means your employment depends on it. Ryan stared at his screen. 2 days. 48 hours away from Sophie, away from routines, away from the careful structure that kept everything from flying apart. "I have a kid," he said. "So, get a sitter." Marcus stood up, stretching. "Look, I get it. Nobody wants to spend their weekend doing trust falls and pretending to care about Janet from accounting. But it's 2 days, free food, and apparently there's kayaking. Could be worse." Ryan didn't answer. He was already calculating logistics, running through the short list of people he trusted with his daughter. His parents were 3 states away. Emma's parents had moved to Arizona, too wrapped up in their own grief to be reliable. There was Mrs. Patterson next door, who watched Sophie sometimes in emergencies, but a whole weekend seemed like too much to ask. His phone buzzed. A text from Sophie's school. Reminder, science fair project due Monday. Materials list attached. Of course the science fair was next week. He pulled up the materials list, scanning through items he didn't have and didn't have time to buy. Baking soda, vinegar, food coloring, poster board. A volcano mold that apparently you couldn't just make from paper mache anymore. "You good?" Marcus asked. "Yeah," Ryan lied. "I'm good." The morning dissolved into meetings about meetings, emails that could have been messages, and messages that should have been emails. Ryan moved through it all on autopilot, the same way he'd moved through the last 3 years. Present, but not participating. There, but not really there. At lunch, he sat in his car and called Mrs. Patterson. "Ryan, honey, I would if I could," she said, and he could hear the genuine apology in her voice. "But my sister's having surgery this weekend. I'm driving down to Phoenix on Friday morning." "No, it's okay," he said quickly. "I shouldn't have. It's not an emergency." "What about that nice girl from your office, the one who came to Sophie's birthday party?" "Melissa moved to Portland last month." "Oh." A pause. "Honey, you know you can't do everything alone forever." Ryan thanked her and hung up before the conversation could go anywhere deeper. He had 45 minutes until his next meeting. He spent it researching last-minute childcare services, each one more expensive than the last, each one requiring references he didn't have and background checks that wouldn't clear in time. By 3 p.m., he'd accepted the inevitable. He'd have to bring Sophie. By 3:30, he'd received a follow-up email clarifying that the retreat was adults only, no exceptions. Please arrange appropriate childcare. By 4, he was composing an email to HR explaining that he'd need to decline due to family obligations. He never sent it. Instead, at 4:15, his phone rang. Internal number, extension he didn't recognize. "Ryan Carter," he answered. "Mr. Carter, this is Ava Sinclair's office. Ms. Sinclair would like to see you at 4:30. Are you available?" His brain stuttered. Yes. Where?" "Executive floor, 10th. The assistant will meet you at the elevator." The line went dead. Ryan sat frozen, running through every possible reason the CEO would want to see him. None of them were good. You didn't get summoned to the 10th floor for congratulations. The 10th floor was where careers went to die. He'd screwed something up, missed a deadline, made a mistake that had somehow rippled up through the company hierarchy until it landed on the desk of someone who mattered. Marcus noticed him standing. You look like you've seen a ghost. I have to go to 10. Oh, shit. Marcus's eyes widened. What did you do? I don't know. Well, it was nice working with you. Ryan took the elevator alone, watching the numbers climb. His reflection in the polished doors looked pale, tired, like someone who'd stopped sleeping properly 3 years ago and never figured out how to start again. The 10th floor was quieter than the rest of the building. Actual art on the walls instead of motivational posters, carpet that absorbed sound. Everything designed to intimidate, and it was working. The assistant, a man in his 20s with perfect hair and a Bluetooth earpiece, barely looked up. Mr. Carter, she's ready for you. Go on in. The office was ridiculous. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a desk that looked hand-carved from a single piece of wood, bookshelves filled with actual books instead of fake decorative spines. And behind the desk, Ava Sinclair, reading something on her tablet with the kind of focus that suggested she'd already forgotten he was coming. Mr. Carter, she said without looking up. Close the door. He closed it. Sit. He sat. She finished whatever she was reading, set the tablet aside, and finally looked at him. Her eyes were gray, he noticed. Storm cloud gray. You haven't RSVP'd for the retreat, she said. I was going to... You were going to decline. It wasn't a question. I saw your draft email. You didn't send it, but you wrote it. Ryan's mouth went dry. How did you... I have access to draft folders for all company email accounts. Standard monitoring protocol. She leaned back in her chair. I'm not interested in the legal justification. I'm interested in why. I have a daughter, he said. I can't find childcare for the weekend. How old? 7. Ava nodded slowly, like she was processing this information through some complex internal algorithm. Your wife passed away. 3 years ago. Car accident. It wasn't a question, but Ryan answered anyway. Yes. And you've been raising Sophie alone since then. Hearing his daughter's name in this office, in this context, felt wrong somehow. Like two parts of his life that were never supposed to touch were suddenly colliding. Yes, he said again. Ava stood up, walked to the window. The afternoon light caught her profile, sharp and certain. I read your file. You've worked here for 3 years. Never late. Never a complaint. Performance reviews are consistently solid. You do your job well. Thank you. That wasn't a compliment. Solid isn't exceptional. You're capable of more, but you've deliberately kept yourself contained. She turned to face him. Why? The question caught him off guard. I'm not sure what you mean. Yes, you are. She crossed her arms. You're smart enough to be leading projects, but you stay in coordination. You're experienced enough to mentor junior staff, but you avoid any role that requires visibility. You've built your entire professional life around being present but unnoticed. Why? Ryan felt exposed, like she'd somehow seen through walls he'd spent years constructing. I have responsibilities outside of work. Everyone has responsibilities. Most people don't use them as hiding places. The words hit harder than they should have. With respect, Ms. Sinclair, I'm not hiding. I'm surviving. Something shifted in her expression. Not quite sympathy, but something adjacent to it. Recognition, maybe. Fair enough, she said quietly. She returned to her desk, pulled out a folder, slid it across to him. I'm going to make you an offer, and I want you to actually think about it before you say no. He opened the folder. Inside was a contract, dense with legal language he'd need hours to parse. The retreat is mandatory for all operations staff, Ava said, but I'm willing to make an exception. You can stay home, no penalties, no questions asked. In exchange, I want you to consider a different position. What position? Special Projects Coordinator. You'd work directly with me on initiatives that cross departmental lines. It's more responsibility, more visibility, and more money. 30% more to start. Ryan stared at the contract. But 30% more money would mean a bigger apartment, better childcare options, maybe even savings for Sophie's future. It would mean breathing room he hadn't had in years. Why me? He asked. Because you see problems before they happen. Because you're meticulous without being paralyzed by perfectionism. Because you understand systems. She paused. And because I think you're wasting yourself out of fear, and I don't like waste. I'm not afraid, he said automatically. Everyone's afraid of something, Mr. Carter. The question is whether you're going to let fear make your decisions for you. The office felt smaller suddenly, like the walls were pressing in. Ryan looked at the contract, at Ava, at the window behind her showing a city he barely participated in anymore. I need to think about it, he said. You have until the retreat. Come to Lake Harmony, see what we're building, meet the team in a different context, then decide. She leaned forward slightly. And regarding your daughter, bring her. The email said, I wrote the email, I'm also unwriting it. There's a kids program running parallel to the retreat, outdoor activities, supervision, meals included. Sophie would probably enjoy it more than you'll enjoy the trust falls. Ryan opened his mouth to argue, to find a reason to say no, to protect the careful distance he'd maintained between his professional life and his personal one. But Ava was already standing, already moving to show him out, the conversation ending before he could construct proper defenses. 4:30 Friday, she said. We leave from the parking garage, pack for 3 days, and Mr. Carter? He paused at the door. Whatever walls you've built, they're not protecting you. They're just making you smaller. Ryan left without responding, because anything he said would have either been a lie or more truth than he was willing to give. The rest of the week passed in a blur of logistics and second-guessing. He told Sophie about the trip, watched her face light up with the kind of pure excitement he'd almost forgotten children were capable of. He packed bags, made lists, triple-checked that he had everything Sophie might need for 3 days in the mountains. He didn't let himself think about Ava's words, about hiding, about fear-making decisions. He definitely didn't think about the moment in her office when she'd looked at him like she could see every broken piece he'd been trying to hold together. Friday came too fast and too slow. He loaded their bags into his car, a Honda that had seen better years but still ran, which was all that mattered. Sophie bounced in the passenger seat, talking nonstop about kayaking and hiking and whether there would be bears. Probably not bears, Ryan said, though he had no idea. The parking garage was chaos. Dozens of employees loading into luxury SUVs and company vans, hauling suitcases and coolers and expensive outdoor gear. Ryan's Honda looked out of place, a rusted reminder of the economic gap between him and most of his colleagues. He found a parking spot near the edge, started unloading. Ryan! He turned. Ava stood 3 feet away wearing jeans, actual jeans, and a lightweight jacket. Her hair was down, falling past her shoulders, and without the armor of a business suit, she looked younger, almost approachable. Almost. You came, she said. You offered a 30% raise. I'd be an idiot not to at least hear you out. A small smile touched her lips. Pragmatic. I respect that. She looked down at Sophie, who was staring at her with open curiosity. You must be Sophie. Are you Dad's boss? Sophie asked. I am. He talks about you sometimes. Ryan's face heated. Sophie, he says you're really smart and kind of scary. Ava's smile widened into something genuine. Your dad's right on both counts. She knelt down to Sophie's level, and Ryan noticed she did it without hesitation, without the careful distance most adults maintained with other people's children. I hear you're interested in science. I'm doing a volcano for the science fair, Sophie said. It's going to explode. All the best volcanoes do. Ava stood, meeting Ryan's eyes. You're in van 3. I'll be driving. We leave in 10 minutes. She walked away before he could respond, leaving Ryan standing in the parking garage with his daughter and a growing sense that he'd made a terrible mistake. The drive took 3 hours. Van 3 held 8 people. Ava in the driver's seat, Ryan in the front passenger seat, because Ava had gestured him there, and 6 other employees in the back, including Marcus, who kept shooting Ryan questioning looks that he steadfastly ignored. Sophie sat in the back with Marcus, talking his ear off about dolphins and volcanoes, and her theory that dogs could learn to read if someone just tried hard enough. Marcus, to his credit, engaged with every tangent like it was the most important conversation he'd ever had. Ava drove in silence for the first hour, navigating highway traffic with the same decisive efficiency she probably brought to board meetings. Ryan stared out the window, watching the city give way to suburbs give way to actual trees, and tried not to think about how close he was to someone he'd spent 3 years avoiding. How long have you been doing this alone? Ava asked suddenly. Ryan glanced back. Sophie was showing Marcus something on her tablet, both of them absorbed. 3 years. That's not what I asked. He looked at her. What did you ask? How long have you been alone? Not how long since your wife died. How long since you let anyone in? The question should have felt invasive. Instead, it just felt accurate. I don't know, he admitted. Maybe longer than 3 years. Emma, my wife, she was the social one. She made friends, planned things, kept us connected to people. I just followed her lead. And after she died, I didn't know how to do it without her. Ava nodded, like this made perfect sense. I lost someone too. My brother. 5 years ago. Ryan wasn't expecting that. I'm sorry. Brain aneurysm. No warning, no goodbye. One day he was there, the next day he wasn't. Her hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. Everyone kept telling me it would get easier. They were wrong. It doesn't get easier. You just get better at carrying it. Yeah, Ryan said quietly. Yeah, that's exactly it. They drove in silence after that, but it was a different kind of silence, shared somehow, like they'd acknowledged something that didn't need further explanation. Lake Harmony appeared through the trees like a postcard, deep blue water surrounded by pine forest, mountains rising in the distance, rustic cabins dotting the shoreline. The main lodge was massive, all exposed timber and stone with a deck that jutted out over the water. Ava parked in the gravel lot, killed the engine. Welcome to mandatory fun. The kids' program coordinator, a woman named Sarah with a bright smile and a clipboard, met them at registration. She swept Sophie away with promises of kayaking and nature scavenger hunts, leaving Ryan standing alone with his overnight bag and a growing sense of displacement. She'll be fine, Ava said, appearing beside him. Sarah's been running kids' programs for 15 years. Sophie's in good hands. I know, You're not used to letting go. Ryan didn't answer because she was right, and admitting it felt like weakness. The cabins were assigned in groups of 4. Ryan ended up in cabin 7 with Marcus and 2 other guys from the operations department, James and David, both of whom he'd worked with for 3 years and barely knew. The cabin was nicer than he'd expected. Real beds instead of bunks. A small sitting area, a bathroom that didn't look like it required tetanus shots. Marcus claimed the bed by the window. So, the CEO knows your daughter's name. So? So that's weird, right? I mean, Ava Sinclair doesn't exactly strike me as the remember your employees' kids' names type. James looked up from unpacking. She offered him a job. Special projects coordinator. Marcus's eyes widened. What? When? Monday, Ryan said. I haven't decided yet. Haven't decided? David laughed. Man, that's a 30% bump. What's there to decide? Ryan didn't have an answer that wouldn't sound insane. I'm afraid of being seen. I'm afraid of mattering. I'm afraid that if I let my life get bigger, there'll be more to lose when it falls apart again. Just need to think about it, he said instead. The first evening was predictably awkward. Icebreakers and trust exercises and a presentation about authentic workplace culture that used the word synergy 17 times. Ryan counted. He kept looking for Sophie, spotting her occasionally through the lodge windows. She was laughing, running with other kids her age, no sign of the careful worry she sometimes wore at home. It should have made him feel better. Instead, it made him feel obsolete. Dinner was served buffet style on the deck. Ryan filled his plate, found a table near the edge, and tried to become invisible. Ava sat down across from him. You're doing it again, she said. Doing what? Hiding in plain sight. She gestured to the table he'd chosen, far from the center of activity, positioned to observe but not participate. You're at a retreat designed for connection, and you've strategically placed yourself as far from connection as possible. Maybe I just like quiet. Maybe you like control. She took a bite of her food, chewed thoughtfully. As long as you're on the edges, you can convince yourself you're protected. Can't get hurt if you're not really present, right? Ryan set down his fork. You don't know me. No, she agreed, but I know what survival looks like when it stops being temporary and becomes permanent. Before he could respond, Sophie appeared at his elbow, breathless and sun-flushed. Dad, we saw a turtle, a real one! And Sarah says, tomorrow we're going to learn about tree identification, and I can bring back samples for my science project even though it's supposed to be a volcano, but maybe I can do trees instead, except I already bought the baking soda." "Breathe," Ryan said, smiling despite himself. Sophie breathed, grinned up at Ava. "Hi again." "Hi again," Ava said. "Sounds like you had a good day." "The best day. Can I sit with you guys?" Ryan opened his mouth to say that Ava was probably busy, that they were discussing work things, that Sophie should sit with her program group, but Ava was already moving her plate, making room. "Of course," she said. Sophie climbed into the chair between them and launched into a detailed account of every moment of her afternoon. Ryan listened, half amazed at his daughter's ability to find joy in everything, half terrified that she was attaching herself to someone who was, technically, still a stranger. But Ava listened like Sophie's stories about turtles and tree bark were the most important intelligence she'd received all day. Asked questions, remembered details, treated a 7-year-old like a person worth taking seriously. And something in Ryan's chest, something that had been locked tight for 3 years, shifted slightly. After dinner, there was a bonfire down by the lake. Someone produced a guitar. People sang songs that Ryan didn't know the words to, and he sat on a log at the edge of the firelight, watching Sophie roast marshmallows with the intensity that suggested she was performing surgery. Ava sat down beside him without asking. "She's a lot like you," she said. "How do you figure?" "She notices everything, details other kids miss, the way you notice things other people don't see." Ava paused. "She's also braver than you are." Ryan bristled. "She's 7. Exactly. She's 7, and she's not afraid to be excited about things, to let people in, to trust that the world won't punish her for caring." Ava's voice was gentle, but the words cut anyway. "When did you stop being brave?" "When being brave stopped being safe." "Nothing's safe, Ryan." "That's the whole point." He looked at her then, really looked. Not the careful glances he'd allowed himself before. Her face was lit by firelight, shadows, and warmth, and for the first time, she didn't look like a CEO or a billionaire or someone whose world existed in a completely different stratosphere. She just looked like someone who'd lost something too and learned to keep walking anyway. "Why do you care?" he asked. "About what?" "About me." "About whether I'm hiding or being brave or wasting my potential. You've got a company to run. Why does it matter what one operations coordinator does with his life?" Ava was quiet for a long moment, watching the fire. When she spoke, her voice was lower, more personal than he'd ever heard it. "Because I've spent 5 years building walls too. Different walls, different reasons, but walls all the same. And last year, I looked around and realized I'd built an empire but lost myself somewhere in the process." She met his eyes. "When I see someone else doing the same thing, choosing survival over living, it bothers me. Maybe because it's a mirror I don't want to look into." Ryan didn't know what to say to that. The conversation had veered into territory he wasn't prepared for, where his boss was no longer his boss, but just another person trying to figure out how to exist in a world that kept taking things away. Sophie ran over, marshmallow sticky and triumphant. "Dad, look, I made the perfect one. It's golden all around." He looked at the marshmallow, which was indeed perfect, and felt something crack open in his chest, not breaking, but opening, like a door he'd kept locked was suddenly swinging wide, letting in light he'd forgotten existed. "It's perfect," he agreed. Sophie handed the marshmallow to Ava. "You should have it, since you let me come on this trip." Ava accepted the offering with a solemnity that matched the moment. "Thank you, Sophie. This is the best marshmallow I've ever received." "I know," Sophie said matter-of-factly, and ran back to the fire to make another one. Ava ate the marshmallow slowly, and Ryan watched her, and somewhere in the watching, something shifted. A recognition, a possibility. A terrifying sense that the walls he'd built were developing cracks, and the person sitting next to him could see every single one. The night grew late. Kids were collected and herded toward their cabins. Ryan walked Sophie to the girls' dormitory, where Sarah promised she'd be safe and warm and would probably talk everyone's ears off until lights out. "Love you, Dad," Sophie said, hugging him tight. "Love you too, monster." "Ava's nice." "Yeah, she is." "I like her." Sophie pulled back, studying his face with an intensity that reminded him uncomfortably of Ava's earlier assessment. "Do you like her?" "She's my boss, Soph." "That's not what I asked." 7 years old, and already cutting through his deflections like they were tissue paper. "Yeah," he admitted. "I like her." Sophie grinned, satisfied, and disappeared into the dormitory, leaving Ryan standing in the dark trying to figure out when he'd lost control of his own life. He walked back toward his cabin, but stopped halfway there, drawn by the sound of water against the shore. The lake was calm, reflecting stars he never saw in the city. He stood at the edge, hands in his pockets, and let himself feel everything he'd been avoiding. Fear, loneliness, the terrible, fragile hope that maybe, there was still something worth reaching for beyond mere survival. "Can't sleep?" He turned. Ava stood a few feet away, wrapped in a jacket that was too big for her. "Too much thinking," he said. She moved closer, stood beside him at the water's edge. "Want to talk about it?" "Not particularly." "Fair enough." They stood in silence, watching the stars reflect on the water, and Ryan felt the careful distance he'd maintained between them collapsing with every second that passed. "I'm not ready," he said finally. "For what?" "For whatever this is." He gestured vaguely between them. I'm not asking you to be ready." Ava's voice was steady, certain. "I'm just asking you to stop running long enough to see what's actually in front of you." "And what's in front of me?" She turned to face him, and the distance between them was suddenly very small, and Ryan's heart was beating too fast, and he couldn't remember the last time he'd felt this simultaneously terrified and alive. "A choice," Ava said quietly. "You can keep building walls, keep staying small, keep convincing yourself that safety is the same thing as living. Or you can take a risk. Let someone see you. Let yourself want something besides survival. I have Sophie to think about. Sophie wants you to be happy. Kids always do." "What if I can't?" The words came out raw, unfiltered. "What if I try, and I fail, and I hurt you, or I hurt Sophie, or I—" "What if you don't?" Ava interrupted. "What if you're stronger than you think? What if the only thing holding you back is the story you keep telling yourself about who you're allowed to be?" Ryan's breath caught. The moment stretched between them, full of everything he'd been afraid to want, everything he'd convinced himself he didn't deserve. And then Ava did something he didn't expect. She stepped back. "I'm not going to push you," she said. "This only works if you choose it. So think about the job, think about what you want, and when you're ready, if you're ready, you know where to find me." She walked away, leaving him alone with the stars and the water and the uncomfortable realization that for the first time in 3 years, he wanted something besides yesterday to come back. He stood there for a long time, letting himself feel it, the wanting, the fear, the possibility that maybe, just maybe, he could be more than the grief that had defined him. When he finally returned to his cabin, Marcus was already asleep. Ryan lay in bed staring at the ceiling and thought about Ava's question. "When did you stop being brave?" He didn't have an answer, but somewhere in the darkness, listening to the sound of wind through pine trees and the distant lap of water against shore, Ryan Carter started thinking maybe, just maybe, it was time to find out what brave looked like again. Morning came through the cabin windows like an accusation. Ryan had slept maybe 3 hours, his mind cycling through the same conversation on repeat. Ava's words, the look on her face, the way she'd stepped back instead of pushing forward. He'd spent 3 years becoming an expert at not wanting things, and now suddenly his brain wouldn't shut up about all the things he'd been pretending didn't exist. Marcus was already up, rummaging through his bag with the kind of noise that suggested he didn't believe in suffering alone. "You look like hell," Marcus said cheerfully. "Thanks. Late night philosophy session with the CEO?" Ryan sat up, running a hand through his hair. "How did you—" "Dude, half the camp saw you two down by the lake. Janet from accounting is already planning your wedding." Marcus tossed him a protein bar. "For what it's worth, I think it's cool. Ava's intense, but she's good people. And you've been a ghost for as long as I've known you. Maybe it's time to try being alive again." Ryan caught the protein bar, didn't open it. "It's not that simple." "It never is, but that doesn't mean it's not worth trying." Marcus pulled on his shoes. "Breakfast in 20 minutes. Try to look less like you're contemplating the void." The dining hall was chaos. Kids and adults mixing, noise bouncing off the timber ceiling, the smell of coffee and pancakes, and too many people in one space. Ryan spotted Sophie at a table with her program group, syrup on her chin, talking with her hands the way Emma used to. His chest tightened. He filled a plate he didn't want, found a seat at a table that was mostly empty, and tried to become invisible again. "Mind if I sit?" He looked up. Ava stood there with her own breakfast, and even in jeans and a pullover sweater, she somehow looked like she was in control of everything within a 50-mile radius. "It's your retreat," Ryan said. "That's not an answer." He gestured to the empty chair. She sat, and for a few minutes they ate in silence. It should have been awkward, but it wasn't. Comfortable, almost, like they'd done this 100 times before. "I didn't sleep much," Ava said finally. "Yeah, me neither. I keep replaying what I said, wondering if I pushed too hard." Ryan looked at her, surprised by the admission. "You didn't push, you saw through things I thought I'd hidden better." "I'm good at that, seeing through things." She took a sip of coffee. "It's a useful skill in business, less useful in actually connecting with people." "You connected with Sophie pretty fast." "Sophie's easy. She says what she means. Doesn't hide behind walls or fear or carefully constructed professional distance." Ava's eyes met his. "She's braver than both of us." Before Ryan could respond, the retreat coordinator, a woman named Michelle with a clipboard and the kind of enthusiasm that should be illegal before 9 a.m., clapped her hands for attention. "Good morning, everyone. I hope you all slept well and are ready for today's activities. This morning, we're doing something a little different. We're going to break into small groups for what we call trust mapping, an exercise designed to help us understand how we show up in relationships, both professional and personal." Marcus appeared at Ryan's elbow. "Oh, good, my favorite. Forced vulnerability with coworkers." Michelle continued, oblivious to the collective groan rippling through the room. "You'll be in groups of 4. We've already assigned them. Check the board by the door. Each group will have a facilitator to guide you through the exercise. Remember, the goal isn't perfection, it's honesty." Ryan checked the board with a sinking feeling he already knew what he'd find. Group 7, Ryan Carter, Ava Sinclair, Marcus Chen, Janet Reeves. Of course, Janet Reeves was the woman from accounting Marcus had mentioned, mid-40s, sharp as a knife, with a tendency to see through bullshit that made her either terrifying or refreshing depending on your perspective. She was already waiting at their assigned table when Ryan arrived, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. "Well," Janet said as they all sat down, "this should be interesting." Their facilitator was a man named David, different from David in Ryan's cabin, who had the calm, measured energy of someone who'd done a lot of therapy and wanted everyone to know it. "Trust mapping is simple," David explained, setting a large sheet of paper in the center of their table. "We're going to explore the concept of emotional availability. I'll ask questions, and you'll place a marker on this spectrum." He indicated a line drawn on the paper, ranging from completely closed to completely open, to indicate where you think you fall. Then we discuss. "What if we don't want to discuss?" Marcus asked. "Then you probably need this exercise more than you think." David smiled like this was a joke. Nobody laughed. First question. In your professional relationships, how available are you emotionally? Do you bring your whole self to work? Or do you keep parts of yourself hidden? Janet went first, placing her marker firmly in the middle. "I'm available enough to do my job well, but not so available that I'm crying in the bathroom when the quarterly numbers are bad." Balance. Marcus put his marker slightly toward the open side. "I'm pretty much what you see. No point pretending to be someone else 8 hours a day." Ava studied the spectrum for a long moment before placing her marker near completely closed. The admission clearly surprised Janet and Marcus, but Ava's expression remained neutral. "I've built a career on being unreadable," she said simply. "Emotional availability is a liability when you're trying to run a company. People respect strength, not vulnerability." David nodded like this was exactly what he'd expected. "And you, Ryan? Where do you fall?" Ryan stared at the paper. The honest answer was that he'd stopped being emotionally available the day Emma died, that he'd locked every part of himself that could feel deeply into a box labeled "too dangerous" and thrown away the key. But saying that out loud, in front of his boss and his coworker and Janet from accounting, felt impossible. He placed his marker next to Ava's. "Same," he said. "Safer that way." David leaned back, studying their choices. Interesting. 2 people in the same position for completely different reasons. Ava, you chose emotional unavailability as strategy. Ryan, you chose it as survival, but the outcome is the same: isolation. I'm not isolated, Ava said, but her voice lacked conviction. Neither am I, Ryan added. Janet snorted. You're both lying, and you both know it. Ava, you eat lunch alone in your office every single day. Ryan, you've worked here 3 years, and I don't think I've ever seen you at a happy hour or company event that wasn't mandatory. That's not connection. That's coexistence. The words stung because they were true. Ryan wanted to argue, to defend himself, but everything he might say would just prove Janet's point. Next question, David said, mercifully moving on. In your personal relationships, how do you handle conflict? Do you engage directly, avoid it, or something in between? They went around again. Janet engaged directly. No surprise there. Marcus tried to diffuse with humor. Ava's answer was clinical. I identify the problem, propose solutions, and expect rational discussion. That's not how emotions work, Janet said. I'm aware, but it's how I work. When it was Ryan's turn, he found himself saying something he hadn't planned. I avoid it. If there's conflict, I'll do anything to make it go away. Apologize even if I'm not wrong. Change the subject. Pretend everything's fine. Because conflict means someone might leave, and I can't. He stopped, realizing he'd said too much. Ava was watching him with an expression he couldn't read. David prompted gently. You can't what? I can't lose anyone else. The words came out quiet but final. So I make myself small enough that there's nothing to fight about. The silence that followed was heavy. Marcus looked uncomfortable. Janet's expression had softened into something that might have been sympathy. Ava's face remained carefully neutral, but her hands had tightened on the edge of the table. That's not sustainable, David said. Making yourself small doesn't prevent loss. It just means you've already lost yourself before anyone else has a chance to leave. Ryan didn't respond because his throat had closed up, and he was suddenly very aware that he was sitting in a room with 3 people who were seeing straight through every defense he'd constructed. The exercise continued. More questions, more uncomfortable revelations, more markers placed on spectrums that proved what Ryan had been trying to ignore. He'd spent 3 years building a life that looked functional from the outside but felt empty from the inside. When David finally released them, Ryan stood so fast his chair nearly toppled. I need some air, he muttered, and left before anyone could follow. He made it halfway to the lake before Ava caught up with him. Ryan, wait! He stopped, didn't turn around. I don't want to talk about it. Then just listen. She moved to stand beside him, both of them facing the water. What you said in there about making yourself small, I understand that. I do it too, just differently. I make myself so big, so untouchable, that people can't get close enough to hurt me. Same outcome, different method. Why are you telling me this? Because last night I asked you to be brave, and this morning I watched you actually be brave, and it made me realize I've been a hypocrite. I can't ask you to take risks I'm not willing to take myself. Ryan finally looked at her. What risk are you taking? This. Talking to you like a person instead of an employee. Admitting that I'm just as scared as you are. Telling you that I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since you walked into my office on Monday. She paused. That's terrifying to say out loud, by the way. His heart was beating too fast. Ava, you don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know that you're not alone in this. Whatever this is. Before he could figure out how to respond, Sophie came running down the path, followed by Sarah and a group of other kids. Dad! Ava, we're going kayaking. Do you want to come watch? Ryan looked at his daughter, flushed with excitement, completely oblivious to the conversation she'd just interrupted, and felt something shift in his chest. This was why he'd built walls, to protect her, to make sure she never had to feel the kind of loss he'd felt. But looking at Sophie now, he realized she wasn't afraid. She'd lost her mother, the same as him, but she hadn't stopped being open, hadn't stopped trusting, hadn't stopped believing that people could be good and life could be full and risk could be worth it. When had she become braver than him? Yeah, he said, surprising himself. Yeah, we'll come watch. The kayaking area was down by the dock, where a dozen colorful kayaks waited in the shallow water. The kids were getting fitted for life jackets, Sarah explaining paddle techniques and safety rules that half of them weren't listening to. Ryan and Ava stood on the shore, far enough back that Sophie wouldn't feel watched, but close enough to intervene if anything went wrong. "She's a natural," Ava observed as Sophie climbed into a kayak and immediately started paddling in confident, if uncoordinated, strokes. "She gets that from Emma, my wife. She was fearless. Would try anything once." Ryan shoved his hands in his pockets. "I was always the cautious one. The one who read instructions and made backup plans and worried about everything that could go wrong." Past tense? What? You said I was always the cautious one. Past tense. Like you're not anymore. Ryan considered this. "I don't know what tense I am now. I've been in survival mode so long I'm not sure what normal looks like." Ava watched Sophie navigate around another kayak, laughing at something another kid said. "Can I ask you something? Why operations coordinator? When you interviewed, you had a background in project management, leadership experience, recommendations that suggested you could have aimed higher. Why did you take a position that was technically a step down?" Ryan had known this question would come eventually. Because operations coordinator was predictable. Set hours, clear responsibilities, no travel required. I needed something I could do well without it taking over my life because my life wasn't mine anymore. It was Sophie's. And now? Now I don't know. The position you offered, special projects coordinator, that's not predictable. That's visibility and responsibility and probably late nights and things that don't fit into neat schedules. It is, Ava agreed. It's also a chance to use your brain for something besides surviving, to build something instead of just maintaining. She turned to face him. "But I'm not going to pressure you. The offer stands regardless of what happens between us personally. Keep that separate in your mind. Your career and whatever this is, they don't have to be entangled." "That's impossible. You're my boss. I'm also a person who's interested in you. Those things can coexist if we let them." Sophie was paddling back toward shore now, her kayak slightly crooked but her face triumphant. She beached the kayak with more enthusiasm than skill, nearly falling out in the process, and ran over to them dripping lake water. "Did you see? I went all the way to that rock and back." "I saw," Ryan said. "You were amazing." "Ava, did you see?" "Every second. You're a natural kayaker." Sophie beamed, then looked between them with the kind of perception that 7-year-olds sometimes have and adults wish they didn't. "Are you guys friends now?" Ryan opened his mouth, closed it. What were they, boss, an employee, potential something more? Two people circling around the possibility of connection while trying not to crash into their own fear? "Yeah," Ava said before he could construct a more complicated answer. "Yeah, I think we are." "Good," Sophie said, satisfied. "Dad needs more friends. He's lonely." And with that devastating assessment of his emotional state, she ran back to rejoin her group, leaving Ryan standing there feeling simultaneously exposed and understood. "Out of the mouths of babes," Ava said quietly. "She's not wrong." The admission came easier than it should have. "I am lonely. I just got really good at pretending I wasn't." They stood there watching kids paddle around in kayaks, and Ryan let himself feel it. The loneliness, the fear, the strange and terrifying pull toward someone who saw through every wall he'd built and wasn't running away. The afternoon brought more trust exercises that Ryan endured with gritted teeth, a workshop on authentic communication that made him want to jump in the lake, and a free period that he spent helping Sophie construct a fairy house out of twigs and moss while trying not to think about Ava's confession that she hadn't stopped thinking about him. Dinner was grilled chicken and vegetables that tasted like someone had consulted a nutritionist instead of a chef. Ryan sat with Marcus and a few other operations people, half listening to a conversation about some server migration project while his mind wandered to a table across the room where Ava sat with the senior leadership team, looking polished and in control and completely unreachable. Except she'd told him she was scared too, which meant the distance was an illusion they were both maintaining. "You're doing it again," Marcus said. "Doing what?" "Staring at her when you think nobody's noticing. You're not subtle, man." Ryan forced his attention back to his plate. "I'm not staring." "Sure. And I'm not planning to fake a stomach illness to get out of tomorrow morning's meditation circle." Marcus stabbed a piece of chicken. "Look, I'm going to say something, and you can tell me to shut up if you want. But you've been half alive for as long as I've known you. I get it, you lost someone. That's brutal, I can't imagine. But Sophie didn't die. You didn't die. And at some point, choosing to stay in grief becomes its own kind of selfishness. Ryan's head snapped up. Excuse me? I said what I said. You're so busy protecting yourself from getting hurt again that you're teaching Sophie that love isn't worth the risk. Is that really what you want her to learn? The words hit like a physical blow. Ryan stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. You don't know what you're talking about, don't I? Because from where I'm sitting, you've got someone incredible interested in you, a kid who wants you to be happy and a job opportunity that could change your life. And you're about to run from all of it because it's easier to hide than to hope. Ryan left the table without responding because anything he said would have been either cruel or confirmation that Marcus was right, and he wasn't ready to admit either. He ended up back at the lake, same spot as the night before, and wondered when his life had become so predictable that even his escape routes had patterns. We have to stop meeting like this, Ava said, appearing beside him like she'd been summoned. People will talk. Let them. She studied his face. What happened? Marcus said something. Must have been good to get you this rattled. Ryan picked up a stone, turned it over in his hands. He said I was being selfish, choosing grief over living, teaching Sophie that love isn't worth the risk. Is he wrong? I don't know, maybe. He threw the stone into the water, watched the ripples spread. Emma and I, we met in college. She was studying art history, which was completely impractical, and I was in business, which was boring, and somehow we worked. She made me less serious. I made her more grounded. We had plans, travel kids, growing old together, all the normal things people plan when they think they have time. Ava didn't interrupt, just listened. The accident happened on a Tuesday. She was driving to pick up Sophie from daycare. Some guy ran a red light going 50 in a 35 zone. Hit her driver's side. She died before the ambulance got there. His voice was steady, clinical, like he was reciting facts instead of the moment his life split into before and after. Sophie was 3, old enough to ask where Mommy was, not old enough to understand that she was never coming back. Ryan, I had to explain to a 3-year-old why her mother disappeared, and then I had to figure out how to be both parents, how to work and pay bills and keep us afloat, how to answer questions I didn't have answers to. So I made rules, no risks, no complications, nothing that could make our life unstable. He finally looked at Ava. And it worked. We survived. Sophie's okay. I'm okay. We're okay. Are you, though? Ava's voice was gentle but direct. Because from where I'm standing, you're surviving, but you're not okay. And Sophie's resilient, but that doesn't mean she should have to be. Kids are allowed to have parents who are more than just functional. What do you want me to say? That I'm ready to jump into something with you? That 3 years is enough time to process losing the person I thought I'd spend my life with? I'm not asking you to be ready. I'm asking you to stop using Emma as a shield against living. Ava moved closer, her voice dropping. She's gone, Ryan, and that's awful, and it's unfair, and you have every right to grieve. But she's gone, and you're still here, and so is Sophie. And the best way to honor what you had isn't to shut down. It's to stay open. To show Sophie that love, even when it ends, is still worth having. The words cracked something open in his chest, something he'd been keeping carefully sealed. His eyes burned. I'm scared, he admitted. I'm so scared of losing someone again that I can barely breathe when I think about letting you in. Because what if something happens? What if I give Sophie another person to love and then that person leaves too? How do I do that to her? You're already doing it to her by staying closed off. She sees you, Ryan. She sees that you're lonely, that you've stopped letting yourself want things. That's the lesson she's learning, not that loss is survivable, but that it's not. Ava took his hand, and the contact was electric, terrifying, real. I can't promise nothing bad will ever happen, but I can promise I'm here right now, and I'm willing to try if you are. Ryan looked down at their joined hands, at the way her fingers fit between his like they'd done this 1,000 times before. He thought about Marcus's words, about Sophie's observation that he was lonely, about Ava's confession that she was scared too. He thought about Emma, about the life they'd planned and the future that died with her, but also about the years they'd had, the love they'd shared, and how she would have hated seeing him like this, shut down, isolated, teaching their daughter that protection was more important than connection. "I don't know how to do this," he said quietly. "Neither do I, but maybe we figure it out together." She was standing so close now that he could see flecks of gold in her gray eyes, could smell whatever subtle perfume she wore that reminded him of cedar and something floral he couldn't name. His heart was pounding so hard he was sure she could hear it. "Ava, you don't have to decide anything tonight. Just don't run. That's all I'm asking. Don't run." He wanted to kiss her. The wanting was overwhelming, physical, terrifying. But instead of acting on it, instead of closing the distance between them, he just stood there holding her hand and letting himself want something for the first time in 3 years. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay, I won't run." Her smile was small but real, and it did something to his chest that felt dangerous and necessary and like coming back to life after being underwater too long. They stood like that for a while, hands linked, not talking, just existing in the same space without walls or fear or the weight of everything they'd both been carrying alone. When they finally walked back toward the cabins, Ryan felt different. Lighter, maybe. Or maybe just less numb, like someone had turned the volume back up on a life he'd been experiencing on mute. Marcus was sitting on the cabin steps when Ryan arrived, and one look at Ryan's face made him grin. "So," Marcus said, "did you stop being an idiot?" "Working on it," Ryan admitted. "Good, because life's too short to spend it afraid of living. Trust me. I learned that one the hard way." Ryan sat down beside him. "What happened?" "Lost my mom to cancer when I was 22. Spent 2 years angry at the world, pushing everyone away, convinced that if I didn't care about anything, nothing could hurt me." Marcus picked at a loose thread on his jeans. "Took my sister sitting me down and telling me I was dishonoring Mom's memory by refusing to live, that she didn't fight to stay alive so I could waste the life she couldn't have. I'm sorry. Don't be. I'm telling you because I see where you are, and I remember being there. And I'm telling you it gets better, not easier, but better, when you stop fighting it and start letting yourself feel things again." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Two people who'd both learned that loss didn't care about your plans and survival sometimes meant choosing to live instead of just exist. Inside the cabin, Ryan lay in bed staring at the ceiling and replaying the entire day. The trust exercise where he'd admitted things he'd never said out loud. Sophie's casual observation that he was lonely. Ava's hand in his, warm and solid and real. Marcus's story about learning to live again after loss. He pulled out his phone, opened the Photos app, scrolled to the album labeled Emma. Pictures from their wedding, from Sophie's birth, from 1,000 ordinary moments that had felt unremarkable until they became all he had left. Emma smiling at the camera, head thrown back in laughter at something he'd said. Emma holding newborn Sophie with a mix of terror and wonder on her face. Emma in their old apartment, paint stained from an art project, looking annoyed that he was taking pictures instead of helping. He looked at her face, at the life they'd built, at everything that had ended too soon. "I think I'm ready to try again," he whispered to the photo. "I don't know if that makes me a terrible person or just human, but I can't keep living in the past. Sophie needs more than that. I need more than that." The photo didn't answer, but somewhere in his chest, something that had been locked tight for 3 years loosened slightly. He fell asleep thinking about Ava's gray eyes and Sophie's observation that he needed more friends, and the terrifying possibility that maybe, just maybe, he was allowed to want things again. The next morning arrived with rain hammering against the cabin windows, turning the lake into a gray sheet of static and the planned outdoor activities into a logistical nightmare. Ryan woke to the sound of water hitting glass and Marcus cursing softly as he checked his phone. "All morning activities moved indoors," Marcus announced, "which means we're doing team-building exercises in the lodge. Kill me now." Ryan grabbed his clothes, trying not to think about how today was the last full day of the retreat, how tomorrow they'd drive back to the city and real life would resume, how he'd have to figure out what any of this meant outside the bubble of Lake Harmony. He found Sophie at breakfast, sitting with Ava of all people, both of them bent over a napkin covered in what looked like scientific diagrams. "And then the baking soda reacts with the vinegar," Sophie was explaining with the seriousness of a doctoral candidate defending her thesis, "and it creates carbon dioxide, which makes the lava come out of the volcano." "Fascinating," Ava said, and she sounded like she meant it. "What color are you making the lava?" Red, obviously, but also maybe orange because Miss Chen said we get extra credit for creative presentation. Ryan approached the table slowly, not wanting to interrupt but drawn by the sight of his daughter and his boss. Were they even just boss and employee anymore? Engaged in serious discussion about elementary school science projects. "Morning," he said. Sophie looked up, grinned. "Dad, Ava knows about volcanoes, real ones. She went to see one in Iceland." "Hawaii," Ava corrected gently. "Kilauea. It was for a corporate retreat, ironically enough, though that one had significantly better weather than this." She gestured to the rain-soaked windows, and Ryan caught the hint of a smile on her face. She looked different this morning, hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing a sweater that looked soft and worn, reading glasses perched on her nose that he'd never seen before. Less CEO, more regular person who happened to run a billion-dollar company. "Can Ava come to my science fair?" Sophie asked suddenly. Ryan nearly choked on the coffee he'd just sipped. "Sophie, if she wants to. She doesn't have to, but it's on Friday, and we can bring guests, and Madison's bringing her grandma, and I thought maybe—" "I'd love to," Ava said, cutting off Sophie's increasingly anxious rambling. Then she looked at Ryan, and there was a question in her eyes. "If that's okay with your dad." It wasn't okay, it was terrifying. It was taking whatever was happening between them and dragging it into his real life, into the small apartment, in the school gymnasium, in the world where Sophie existed. It was mixing everything he'd been trying to keep separate. "Yeah," he heard himself say. "Well, yeah, that would be great." Sophie's face lit up like he'd just promised her Disneyland, and she launched into detailed plans about where Ava should stand for the best view and whether she'd want to see the volcano explode more than once, because Sophie was planning to do at least 3 demonstrations. Ava listened to all of it with the same focused attention she probably gave to board meetings, asking questions and making suggestions. And Ryan watched them both and felt something in his chest crack open wider. The morning's indoor activities were exactly as painful as Marcus had predicted. They played games with names like Human Knot and Trust Circle that required physical contact and emotional vulnerability and Ryan's desire to walk into the lake fully clothed. But he participated because Ava was watching, because Sophie was somewhere in this building having the time of her life, because he'd promised not to run. During a break, Janet from accounting cornered him by the coffee station. "So," she said without preamble, "you and the CEO." "There's no me, and please, I've worked here for 8 years. I've never seen Ava Sinclair look at anyone the way she looks at you. And I've definitely never seen her voluntarily attend a 7-year-old science fair." Janet poured herself coffee that looked strong enough to strip paint. "Just don't screw it up. She's good people, and you seem like you might be too once you stop trying to disappear. Does everyone here have opinions about my life?" "Only the ones who are paying attention. Most people are too wrapped up in their own drama to notice yours." She stirred her coffee with more force than necessary. "For what it's worth, I think it's good. You've been a ghost since you started. About time you started haunting the place properly." Before Ryan could formulate a response, Michelle, the retreat coordinator, called everyone back for the next activity, something called vulnerability mapping, that sounded like his personal nightmare. They were back in their small groups from yesterday. David, the facilitator, had them all sitting in a circle, a box of tissues conspicuously placed in the center like a warning. "Today we're going to explore our relationship with vulnerability," David began. "Specifically, what we're afraid of revealing about ourselves and why." Marcus groaned audibly. "I'll start," David continued, ignoring Marcus's despair. "I'm afraid that people will discover I don't have all the answers, that despite the training and the degrees and the years of experience, sometimes I'm just guessing and hoping I get it right." The confession hung in the air. Janet went next. "I'm afraid people think I'm cold, that my directness reads as not caring, when really I care so much it scares me, so I keep everything professional to protect myself." Marcus shifted in his seat. "I'm afraid of being ordinary, of looking back at my life and realizing I didn't do anything that mattered." Then everyone was looking at Ava, waiting. She sat perfectly still for a moment, and Ryan could see the internal calculation happening. How much to reveal? What was safe? Where the line between authenticity and exposure existed. "I'm afraid of being alone," she said finally. and her voice was quieter than Ryan had ever heard it. I've built this life that looks successful from the outside. Company, money, influence. But most nights I go home to an empty apartment and realize I've prioritized achievement over connection so thoroughly that I'm not sure I remember how to do the second thing anymore. The silence after her words was heavy. Ryan wanted to reach across the circle, take her hand, tell her she wasn't alone. But that would have exposed them both in ways neither was ready for, so he just held her gaze and hoped she could read what he couldn't say. Then it was his turn. "I'm afraid," he started, then stopped, breathed, started again. "I'm afraid that if I let myself be happy again, I'm betraying Emma. Like moving forward means leaving her behind, and I promised her forever. And how do you break a promise to someone who can't release you from it?" His voice cracked on the last word. The tissues in the center of the circle suddenly made sense. "And I'm afraid that Sophie will resent me, that someday she'll be old enough to understand that I could have given her a fuller life, a happier father, more love in our home, but I was too scared to try, that my fear will become her burden." He hadn't meant to say that last part, hadn't even known he was thinking it until the words were out. Ava was looking at him with something that might have been recognition or empathy or her own reflected fear. Marcus had gone completely still. Even Janet looked affected, her usual sharp edges softened into something gentler. "That's a lot of weight to carry," David said quietly. "Have you ever considered that moving forward isn't betrayal? That Sophie might need to see you happy more than she needs you to be a monument to grief?" "Someone told me something similar recently," Ryan admitted, glancing at Ava. "And what did you say?" "I said I'd try." "Trying is vulnerable," David said. "Trying means accepting you might fail, might get hurt, might lose again, but it's the only way through. You can't go around grief or under it or over it. You have to walk straight through the middle of it and come out the other side changed." The session ended shortly after, everyone emotionally wrung out and in desperate need of the lunch that was being served in the dining hall. Ryan escaped outside despite the rain, needing air and space and a moment to process the fact that he'd just admitted his deepest fears to a group that included his boss and his coworker and Janet from accounting. He was standing under the overhang by the lodge entrance when Ava found him. "You ran," she said. "I walked purposefully." "Same thing." She joined him under the overhang, both of them watching rain turn the world into watercolor. "What you said in there about betraying Emma, I understand that." "Yeah?" "When my brother died, I threw myself into work. 16-hour days, weekends, holidays. Built the company into what it is now. And everyone said I was honoring his memory, channeling my grief into something productive." She paused. "But really, I was just avoiding feeling anything. If I stayed busy enough, I didn't have to face the fact that he was gone and I was still here, and I didn't know how to exist in a world without him in it." Ryan turned to look at her. "When did you figure it out?" "I haven't, not completely, but last year I was at a medical conference. We were pitching our health data analytics platform, and this oncologist pulled me aside, said he'd used my brother's case in teaching, that the sudden nature of his death had helped him understand certain warning signs better." Ava's voice wavered slightly. "And I realized that even in death, my brother's life mattered, that the best way to honor him wasn't to stop living, but to live so fully that it justified the time I got that he didn't. That's," Ryan struggled to find words, "that's really beautiful. It's also really hard, because living fully means being vulnerable, and vulnerability means risk, and risk means potential loss." She looked at him directly. "But I'm starting to think the alternative is worse. The choosing safety over life is just a slower kind of dying." Ryan thought about Sophie, about the way she jumped into things without fear, about how she'd asked if Ava could come to her science fair like it was the most natural thing in the world. His daughter hadn't learned to protect herself yet, hadn't learned that love could be dangerous. Maybe that wasn't something she needed to learn from him. "I want to try," he said. "With you. With this. Whatever this is. But I don't know how to do it without being terrified every single second." "Then be terrified. We'll both be terrified together." Ava moved closer, close enough that he could see rain droplets caught in her hair, could count the different shades of gray in her eyes. "But let's try anyway. What if I screw it up?" "Then you screw it up. People do it all the time. The world keeps turning." She smiled slightly. "What if you don't, though? What if it actually works?" Before Ryan could answer, the door burst open and Sophie came running out, followed by Sarah and 3 other kids, all of them soaked and laughing. "Dad, Ava! The power went out and we're doing flashlight tag in the lodge and you have to come play." "Sophie, we're not really," Ryan started. "Please?" "Sarah said adults can play too and it'll be fun and you never play games with me anymore." The last part hit harder than it should have. When had he stopped playing with her? When had survival become so consuming that he'd forgotten joy was part of the job? "Okay," he said. "Yeah, okay, we'll play." Sophie squealed and grabbed his hand, dragging him toward the door. Ava followed, and for the next hour, Ryan found himself running through a darkened lodge with a flashlight, hiding behind furniture, catching and being caught, listening to Sophie's laughter echo off the timber ceiling. At one point, he and Ava ended up pressed behind the same couch, breathing hard, trying not to laugh and give away their position. She was so close he could feel the warmth of her, could smell her shampoo, could see the way her eyes reflected the scattered flashlight beams crossing the room. "This is ridiculous," she whispered. "Completely. I haven't played flashlight tag since I was 12. How are you at it?" "Terrible. I'm too competitive. I take it way too seriously." As if to prove her point, a flashlight beam swung toward their hiding spot, and Ava immediately grabbed Ryan's hand and pulled him toward a different hiding place, both of them scrambling behind the stone fireplace while Sophie and Marcus searched the area they'd just abandoned. They made it without being caught, collapsing against the wall in a tangle of limbs and suppressed laughter. Ava's hand was still in his, and neither of them moved to change that. "See?" she whispered. "Too competitive." "I don't know," Ryan whispered back. "Seems like it's working." Their faces were inches apart. In the darkness, with flashlight beams crossing overhead and Sophie's voice calling out somewhere in the distance, Ryan felt 16 instead of 32, like he was discovering something for the first time instead of trying to remember what he'd forgotten. Ava leaned closer, and he could feel his heart trying to exit his chest, could feel every nerve ending wake up and pay attention, could feel the weight of 3 years of isolation lifting like fog. "Can I?" she started. "Yes," he said before she could finish the question. She kissed him, soft, tentative, a question and an answer at the same time. Ryan's free hand found her waist, pulled her closer, and for a moment the entire world narrowed to this: the press of her lips, the feeling of her fingers threading through his hair, the sense that he was waking up from a very long sleep. Someone's flashlight beam swept across them and they broke apart, breathing hard, staring at each other in the darkness. "Found them!" Marcus's voice echoed through the lodge. "They're behind the fireplace, and they were definitely making out." "Marcus!" Ryan and Ava said simultaneously. Sophie came running over, shining her flashlight directly in their faces. "Were you really kissing?" Ryan's face was on fire. "Sophie, because that would be okay. I just want to know if it's happening because then I can tell Madison that my dad has a girlfriend and she'll stop saying I'm lying." You told Madison I have a girlfriend?" "I told her you were going to have a girlfriend because Ava looks at you the way Prince Eric looks at Ariel in The Little Mermaid. And that's how you know someone likes someone." Ava was trying very hard not to laugh. Ryan could feel her shaking against his shoulder. "How about we talk about this later?" he managed. "Okay, but just so you know, I think it's good. You should have someone who makes you smile." Sophie turned to Ava. "You make him smile. He doesn't smile enough." Then she ran off to chase Marcus, leaving Ryan and Ava alone in the darkness again. "Well," Ava said, "that was subtle." "She's 7. Subtle isn't in her vocabulary." Ryan ran a hand through his hair. "I'm sorry. She shouldn't have." "I'm not sorry." Ava stood up, pulled him to his feet. "She's right. You don't smile enough. And for what it's worth, you make me smile too." The game continued around them, but Ryan wasn't paying attention anymore. He was too busy processing the fact that he'd just kissed someone who wasn't Emma, that Sophie had basically given them her blessing, that the carefully controlled walls he'd built were crumbling faster than he could shore them up. And the terrifying part was that he didn't want to shore them up anymore. Dinner that night was chaotic. Kids and adults mixed together, Sophie holding court at a table telling everyone about the flashlight tag game and strategically omitting the kissing part, though her meaningful looks at Ryan and Ava probably communicated more than words would have. Ryan found himself sitting with Ava and Sophie and Marcus, the four of them forming an oddly functional unit. Marcus was teaching Sophie some kind of complicated hand-slapping game. Ava was explaining the chemistry behind volcano reactions with actual scientific accuracy, and Ryan was just watching it all unfold with a feeling he hadn't experienced in 3 years. Contentment. Maybe even happiness. After dinner, Sarah collected the kids for their final evening activity, a night hike with lanterns and stories about the forest. Sophie hugged Ryan tight before leaving. "I like her," she whispered in his ear. "She's nice and smart, and she doesn't treat me like a baby." "I like her too," Ryan whispered back. "Good, because I was worried you were going to be alone forever, and that seemed really sad." She pulled away before he could respond, running to catch up with her group, leaving Ryan standing there feeling simultaneously blessed and devastated by his daughter's perceptiveness. The adult evening program was less structured. A bonfire on the beach despite the earlier rain, drinks from a makeshift bar, music playing from someone's portable speaker. Most people had broken off into smaller groups, the forced team building giving way to actual organic connection. Ryan found a spot by the fire, watching flames dance against the darkness. Ava appeared beside him with 2 bottles of beer. "Thought you might need this," she said, handing him one. "Thanks." They drank in comfortable silence for a while, listening to conversations happening around them, watching sparks rise into the night sky. "So," Ava said finally, "Sophie gave us her blessing. Apparently she's been planning this for a while. I had no idea she was paying that much attention. Kids always are. They see things adults miss because we're too busy pretending we're fine." Ava took a sip of her beer. "For what it's worth, I think she's pretty incredible." "She is. She's the best thing I've ever done, and I'm constantly terrified I'm going to screw her up." "You're not screwing her up. She's happy and confident and brilliant. You're doing better than you think." Ryan wanted to believe that, wanted to trust that his best was actually good enough, that Sophie would look back on these years and see a father who tried instead of a father who failed. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Always?" "Why me? You could have anyone. Someone without baggage, without a kid, without 3 years of trauma they're still processing. Why take on all of this?" Ava turned to face him fully. "Because you're real. Because you don't want anything from me except to be seen. Because when you look at me, you see a person, not a position or a bank account or an opportunity." She paused. "And because I've spent 5 years being successful and lonely, and I'm tired of choosing one over the other." "What if I can't give you what you need? What if you can? What if we stop catastrophizing and just see where this goes?" She set down her beer, took his hand. "I'm not asking for forever, Ryan. I'm asking for now, for trying. For seeing if this thing between us is real or just proximity and timing." "It's real," he said quietly. "I'm scared of it, but it's real." "Good. Because I'm scared too, and it's nice not to be scared alone." They sat like that for a long time, hands linked, watching the fire burn down to embers, and Ryan thought about all the moments that had led them here. The coffee mug shattering in Ava's office, the conversation by the lake, Sophie's observation that he was lonely, the trust exercises that had cracked both of them open, the kiss behind the fireplace that felt like waking up. Around them, people were saying goodnight, heading back to their cabins. The retreat was almost over. Tomorrow they'd drive back to the city, back to real life, back to the question of what any of this meant outside the bubble of Lake Harmony. "What happens when we get back?" Ryan asked. "I don't know. We figure it out as we go." Ava stood, pulled him to his feet. "But right now, do you want to take a walk?" They walked along the shore, the lake dark and quiet beside them, the lodge lights growing distant behind them. Ava told him about growing up with her brother, about how they'd been inseparable until college pulled them in different directions, about the guilt she still carried for being too busy to visit the month before he died. Ryan told her about Emma, about their early years and Sophie's birth, and the ordinary magic of a life that felt unremarkable until it was gone. About the year after Emma's death, when he'd functioned on autopilot, doing everything necessary to keep Sophie alive while wanting to stop existing himself. "What changed?" Ava asked. "Sophie turned 4. She made me a birthday card. I still have it. That said, 'Happy birthday, Daddy. I love you even when you're sad.' And I realized she'd been watching me be sad for a year, that I was teaching her that death meant stopping, that I was giving her a father's body without a father's presence. He picked up a rock, threw it into the water. So I decided to try harder, to be present, to build a life that worked even if it didn't feel full. And now? Now I'm wondering if working is enough, if Sophie deserves more than just functional. She deserves a father who's happy, and you deserve to be happy. Ava stopped walking, turned to face him. I know it's terrifying. Trust me, I'm right there with you. But I think we owe it to ourselves to try. Ryan looked at her, this brilliant, complicated woman who'd somehow seen past his walls to the person underneath, who'd pushed him and challenged him and refused to let him hide. He thought about Marcus's words about dishonoring his mother's memory by refusing to live, about Emma, who'd loved life so fully she'd made even grocery shopping an adventure, about Sophie, who'd asked if Ava could come to her science fair like inviting joy into their lives was the simplest thing in the world. Okay, he said. Okay, let's try. Ava smiled, and it transformed her entire face from sharp and controlled to open and almost vulnerable. Yeah? Yeah. I don't know what I'm doing, and I'll probably panic at least 3 times a week, but yeah, let's try. She kissed him again, slower this time, deeper, and Ryan let himself fall into it without counting the ways it could go wrong. Let himself feel without calculating the risk. Let himself want without immediately building walls around the wanting. When they finally pulled apart, Ava rested her forehead against his. For the record, she said, I'll probably panic at least twice a week, so between us we'll have a solid panic schedule going. He laughed, and it felt good, felt right, felt like something he'd been holding back for too long. They walked back to the lodge holding hands, and Ryan didn't let go even when they passed groups of his coworkers who definitely noticed and would definitely talk. Let them talk. He was done hiding. At the split where they'd go to their separate cabins, Ava stopped. Tomorrow, she said, when we get back to the city, dinner? You and Sophie and me? Somewhere casual, no pressure, just seeing if this translates outside of corporate retreat land? Ryan's chest tightened with fear and hope in equal measure. She'd love that. And you? I'm terrified. But yes. Good. Terrified means it matters. She kissed him once more, quick and sweet. Good night, Ryan. Good night. He watched her walk away, and then he stood there in the dark for a moment just breathing, just existing, just being alive in a way he hadn't let himself be in 3 years. Marcus was awake when Ryan got back to the cabin, reading something on his tablet. So, Marcus said without looking up, you kissed the CEO. Sophie told you? Sophie told everyone. Pretty sure the kids' program is now running a betting pool on when you'll make it official. He finally looked up, grinned. I'm happy for you, man. You deserve this. I don't know if I deserve anything, but I'm going to try anyway. That's the spirit. Fake it till you make it, or however that saying goes. Marcus set aside his tablet. For real, though, I know it's scary. But you're allowed to be happy. Emma would want that. Ryan sat down on his bed. How do you know what Emma would want? Because anyone who loved you enough to marry you and have a kid with you would want you to keep living after she was gone. That's what love is. Wanting the other person to be okay even when you can't be there to see it. The words settled into Ryan's chest, finding a home next to all the fear and hope and tentative joy. Maybe Marcus was right. Maybe moving forward wasn't betrayal but honor. Maybe the best way to keep Emma's memory alive was to live the kind of full, open-hearted life she'd believed in. He fell asleep that night thinking about tomorrow. The drive back, dinner with Ava and Sophie, the science fair on Friday, the slow, careful building of something new on a foundation that included loss but wasn't defined by it. And for the first time in 3 years, Ryan Carter let himself hope that maybe, just maybe, the story wasn't over yet. The drive back to the city felt different than the drive up had. Sophie talked nonstop from the back seat about everything she'd done, every friend she'd made, every moment that had mattered. Ryan sat in the passenger seat of Van 3 again, hyper-aware of Ava's presence beside him, of the way her hand occasionally drifted from the gear shift like it might reach for his before returning to safe territory. They hadn't told anyone officially, hadn't made some big announcement, but the way Marcus kept smirking from the back seat and the knowing looks from half the operations department suggested the secret was about as secret as a marching band. So Friday, Ava said during a lull in Sophie's monologue about tree identification, what time is the science fair? 6 o'clock, but you really don't have to. I want to. She glanced at him briefly before returning her eyes to the road. Unless you don't want me there. I want you there. I just don't want you to feel obligated. Ryan, if I didn't want to spend my Friday evening watching 7-year-olds present science projects, I wouldn't have offered. I'm difficult, not a martyr. From the back seat, Sophie piped up. What's a martyr? Someone who does things they don't want to do and then makes sure everyone knows about it, Ava answered. Oh, like when Dad makes me eat vegetables and then tells everyone I'm such a good eater even though I hate broccoli? Exactly like that. Ryan shot Ava a look. Thanks for that. Any time. They reached the city by early afternoon, the retreat dissolving back into regular life as vans pulled into the parking garage and people grabbed their bags and said goodbyes that ranged from genuine to relieved, it's over. Sophie was practically vibrating with leftover energy, already planning what she'd tell Mrs. Patterson about the trip. So, Ava said as Ryan pulled their bags from the trunk, tonight, dinner? Sophie grabbed Ryan's arm. Can we, please? Ava said she knows a place with really good pizza. I said I know a place with acceptable pizza, Ava corrected. Don't oversell it. Ryan looked at his daughter's hopeful face, at Ava's carefully neutral expression that wasn't quite hiding her own hope, and felt the last of his resistance crumble. Yeah, he said. Yeah, let's do pizza. Sophie cheered. Ava smiled, and Ryan loaded their bags into his beat-up Honda, trying not to think about how his car looked parked next to Ava's sleek Tesla, how his whole life probably looked small and worn compared to hers, how this could all fall apart the moment she saw how he actually lived. Stop it, Ava said quietly, appearing beside him. Stop what? Whatever you're thinking. I can see it on your face. You're already convinced this won't work because of money or status or whatever story you're telling yourself. She waited until he looked at her. I don't care about your car, Ryan. I care about you. Get that through your head. My apartment is small. So is mine. Square footage doesn't equal happiness. You live in a penthouse downtown. I live in an expensive box that echoes when I talk to myself, which I do frequently because I'm usually alone. She touched his arm briefly. Your apartment has Sophie in it. That automatically makes it better than mine. Sophie was already climbing into Ryan's car, chattering about whether they should get pepperoni or sausage or both. Ryan watched her, then looked back at Ava. 6 o'clock? He asked. I'll text you the address. And Ryan? She leaned closer. Breathe. This is supposed to be fun, remember? Right. Fun. He'd almost forgotten what that felt like. The apartment looked smaller when Ryan saw it through Ava's potential eyes. The couch had a stain from when Sophie had spilled juice 2 months ago. The kitchen tile was cracked in 3 places. The refrigerator was covered in Sophie's artwork and spelling tests, and a photo of Emma that Ryan still couldn't bring himself to take down. He changed shirts twice, settled on a button-down that wasn't too formal, but wasn't too casual, then changed again because Sophie said the blue one made him look like he was trying too hard. Just wear the gray one, she said from her perch on his bed, where she was supposed to be getting ready herself, but had instead appointed herself his stylist. It makes your eyes look nice. Since when do you know about what makes eyes look nice? Madison's older sister told us. She's in high school. She knows everything about boys. Ryan pulled on the gray shirt, studied himself in the mirror. He looked tired, nervous, like someone who hadn't been on anything resembling a date in over 3 years and had no idea what he was doing. You look good, Dad, Sophie said seriously. Ava's gonna like it. Thanks, monster. He turned to face her. Hey, I need to ask you something. About Ava. About us spending time together. Sophie's face went carefully neutral in the way kids' faces do when they're trying to hide what they're feeling. Okay, if this bothers you, if having Ava around feels wrong or weird or like I'm trying to replace your mom, you need to tell me. Because you're the most important person in my life, and I won't do anything that hurts you. Sophie was quiet for a long moment, picking at a loose thread on his comforter. When she finally spoke, her voice was smaller than usual. I don't remember Mom very much, just little things. Like how she sang off key and she always smelled like flowers, and she used to draw me pictures of animals. She looked up at him. Is that bad? That I don't remember more? Ryan's chest constricted. He sat down beside her, pulled her into his lap like he used to when she was smaller. No, baby, that's not bad. You were so little when she died. It's okay that you don't remember everything. Sometimes I feel like I should be sadder. Madison's grandma died last year, and Madison still cries about it. But I don't really cry about Mom anymore. Does that mean I didn't love her enough? Oh, Sophie. Ryan held her tighter. You loved her perfectly. You were 3. You loved her the way 3-year-olds love, completely, without understanding that people can leave. And you being okay now doesn't mean you didn't love her. It means you're healthy and resilient and exactly what she would have wanted. Do you think she'd like Ava? The question caught him off guard. Yeah, I think she would. Your mom liked people who were smart and direct and didn't pretend to be something they weren't. That's Ava. Sophie nodded against his shoulder. I like her too. She talks to me like I'm a real person, not just a kid. And she makes you smile. You didn't smile much before. I smiled. Not like you do now. Not like you're actually happy instead of just trying to be happy. 7 years old and reading him like a book he thought he'd kept closed. Ryan kissed the top of her head. So it's okay? Me spending time with Ava? Yeah, but Dad. Sophie pulled back to look at him seriously. If you're going to like her, you should really like her. Not just pretend or try it out. Because I'm going to like her too, and if she leaves, it'll be sad. So make sure first, okay? The weight of that request settled heavy on Ryan's shoulders. His 7-year-old daughter, already wise enough to protect her own heart, asking him to be certain before introducing more risk into their lives. I'll make sure, he promised, hoping it was a promise he could keep. They took the bus to the restaurant because parking downtown was a nightmare, and Ryan's Honda was making a noise he didn't want to explain to a mechanic yet. Sophie pressed her face against the window, pointing out landmarks and asking questions about buildings they passed. The restaurant Ava had chosen was in a neighborhood Ryan didn't usually come to. Not fancy exactly, but nice. The kind of place that had cloth napkins and waiters instead of paper towels and a counter. He felt out of place immediately. Ava was already there, sitting at a table by the window, wearing jeans and a sweater that looked casually expensive in that way, where you couldn't tell if it cost $30 or $300. She waved when she saw them. You made it, she said as they approached. I was starting to think you'd backed out. Bus was late, Ryan said, sliding into the booth across from her. Sophie climbed in beside him, then immediately scooted to sit next to Ava instead. Traitor, Ryan muttered. Ava promised to tell me about the volcanoes in Hawaii, Sophie said matter-of-factly. Iceland, Ava corrected. Hawaii was a different trip, but I can tell you about both if you want. They ordered pizza, pepperoni and sausage because Sophie couldn't choose, and Ava launched into a story about visiting volcanic sites that somehow made geology sound fascinating. Sophie hung on every word, asking questions that Ava answered with the same seriousness she probably gave to board meetings. Ryan watched them and felt something in his chest expand painfully. This was what he'd been denying Sophie without realizing it. Not a mother, nobody could replace Emma, but another adult who took her seriously, who engaged with her interests, who made her feel seen. Your dad's staring, Ava said to Sophie without looking at Ryan. He does that sometimes, Sophie replied. I think it means he's happy, but doesn't want to admit it. Ah, I'm familiar with that particular condition. Do you have it too? Constantly. Ryan cleared his throat. I'm sitting right here. We know, they said in unison, then looked at each other and laughed. The pizza arrived, and for a while they just ate and talked about nothing important. Sophie's upcoming science fair, a movie she wanted to see, whether dogs or cats made better pets. Normal conversation, the kind Ryan had forgotten how to have because for 3 years every conversation had carried weight, had been about logistics or grief, or just getting through another day. So, Ava said after Sophie excused herself to use the bathroom. How are you doing? Really? Terrified, Ryan admitted, but in a good way maybe. I don't know. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop. What other shoe? The one where you realize this is too complicated, that I come with too much baggage, that there are easier options out there. Ava set down her pizza slice, wiped her hands on her napkin with deliberate precision. Ryan, I'm 30 years old and I run a billion-dollar company. I work 80-hour weeks. I have trust issues that would require a team of therapists to unpack. My idea of a vacation is checking email from a different time zone. I am not exactly a low-maintenance option myself. That's different. It's not different. We're both complicated people with complicated histories trying to figure out if we can build something together. That's not a bug. It's the feature. She reached across the table, took his hand. I'm not going anywhere just because this is hard. Hard doesn't scare me. Half-assing it because you're afraid to fully commit? That scares me. I'm not half-assing this. Then stop waiting for me to leave and start trusting that I'm here because I want to be. Sophie returned before Ryan could respond, announcing that the bathroom had fancy soap that smelled like flowers, and could they get soap like that for home? The moment passed, but Ava's words stayed with him, settling into the spaces where his fear had been living rent-free. After dinner, they walked to a nearby park where Sophie immediately found a playground and begged to swing for, "Just 10 minutes, please, Dad, please." Ryan and Ava sat on a bench watching Sophie pump her legs, trying to swing high enough to touch the sky. "Thank you," Ryan said. "For what?" "For being patient, for not pushing, for showing up even though I'm a mess." "You're not a mess. You're a person processing loss while raising a kid alone. There's a difference." Ava leaned back against the bench. "And I'm not being patient. I'm being honest about what I want, which is you. Messy, complicated, terrified you." Ryan looked at her profile against the fading daylight, at the way she watched Sophie with genuine interest instead of polite tolerance, at the way she'd shown up to a casual pizza place without makeup and with her hair down and had somehow made him feel like this was exactly where she wanted to be. "I'm going to screw this up," he said. "Probably. I'll screw it up too. We'll take turns." She glanced at him, smiled slightly. "But maybe we'll also get it right sometimes. Maybe that's enough." "Is it? Enough?" "I don't know, but I'd like to find out." Sophie ran over, breathless and grinning. "Can Ava come over to see my room? I want to show her my rock collection." Ryan looked at Ava, saw the question in her eyes. His apartment, his real life. The space where Emma's memory still lived in photos, and Sophie's baby books, and the coffee mug he still couldn't bring himself to throw away. "Yeah," he said, the word coming out easier than he expected. "Yeah, that'd be nice." The bus ride back was Sophie wedged between them, talking about each rock in her collection and where she'd found it and what made it special. Ava listened like it was the most important geological survey she'd ever heard. The apartment building looked more run down in the evening light. The lobby needed paint. The elevator made concerning noises. Ryan felt every flaw acutely as they rode up to the third floor. "Fair warning," he said as he unlocked the door. "It's small and messy. And not—" "Ryan?" Ava put her hand on his arm. "Stop apologizing for your life." The apartment was exactly as they'd left it. Sophie's backpack dumped by the door. Breakfast dishes still in the sink. The lived-in chaos of a single parent who worked full-time and was doing his best. Ryan watched Ava take it in, waiting for judgment that never came. Instead, she walked to the refrigerator, studied the gallery of Sophie's artwork. "She's talented," Ava said, pointing to a watercolor of what might have been a sunset or might have been an explosion. "Is she interested in art?" "Sometimes. She goes through phases. Last month it was dinosaurs. This month it's rocks and science. Next month, who knows?" Sophie grabbed Ava's hand. "Come see my room. I have 73 rocks. Well, 72 because I lost the sparkly one, but I'm going to find it." She dragged Ava down the short hallway, leaving Ryan alone in the kitchen trying to process the fact that this was happening. Ava Sinclair, CEO of a billion-dollar company, was currently being shown a rock collection by his 7-year-old daughter in their cramped apartment, and she hadn't run screaming. He followed them to Sophie's room, leaned against the doorframe watching. Sophie had laid out her entire collection on the bed, narrating the origin story of each rock with the seriousness of a museum curator. Ava sat cross-legged on the floor, asking questions, picking up rocks to examine them, treating this like it mattered. Ryan's phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. "How's the date going? Did you panic yet?" He typed back, "She's looking at rocks with Sophie. I think I'm falling for her." Marcus's response came immediately. "Think?" Dude, you fell 3 days ago. You're just now noticing. Maybe he was right. Maybe Ryan had been falling since that first conversation in Ava's office, or the moment by the lake, or watching her eat Sophie's marshmallow like it was a Michelin star dessert. Maybe the falling had started before he'd even recognized what was happening. Dad, come look at this one. Sophie held up a piece of quartz. Ava says it's formed from silicon and oxygen atoms. Isn't that cool? He moved into the room, sat down beside Ava, and let himself be pulled into the world of rocks and atoms and his daughter's inexhaustible enthusiasm. At some point, Ava's shoulder pressed against his. At some point, her hand found his. At some point, Ryan stopped cataloging all the ways this could go wrong and just let it be what it was. After the rock tour, Sophie requested hot chocolate, which Ryan made while Ava sat at their small kitchen table, looking comfortable in a space that wasn't comfortable, that was barely functional, that was nothing like what she was used to. This is nice, she said. The hot chocolate? It's just powder and milk. No, this. All of it. The apartment, Sophie. The rocks. You burning the milk slightly. I didn't burn. He checked the pot. Fine, he'd burned it slightly. How did you even notice that? I notice everything. It's a blessing and a curse. She accepted the mug he offered. But I mean it. This is nice. Real. I spend so much time in spaces that are designed to impress that I forgot what it's like to just exist somewhere. Sophie joined them at the table with her own mug, topped with an irresponsible amount of whipped cream because Ryan was too tired to enforce limits. Can I ask you something? Sophie said to Ava. Always. Do you get lonely, being a boss and stuff? Ava didn't brush off the question or deflect to something easier. She considered it seriously, the way she considered all of Sophie's questions. Yeah, she said finally. I do. Being in charge means people treat you differently. They're careful around you. They don't invite you to things because they assume you're too busy or wouldn't be interested. So even when I'm in a room full of people, I'm usually alone. That sounds sad. It is sometimes, but your dad and I were trying to fix that, trying to be less alone. Sophie nodded like this made perfect sense. Good. Because Dad gets lonely too, even though he pretends he doesn't. And now you can be not lonely together. That's the plan, Ava agreed. Ryan looked at his daughter, at this small person who saw through every defense he'd built and called them out with the casual brutality of childhood honesty and felt overwhelming love mixed with terror that he was going to mess this up, that Sophie was already attaching herself to Ava, and what happened when, if, it didn't work out. Hey, Soph, he said. Bedtime, school tomorrow. But Ava's still here. Ava has work tomorrow, too. We all need sleep. Sophie grumbled but went to brush her teeth, leaving Ryan and Ava alone in the kitchen. The silence felt heavy with things unsaid. I should go, Ava said, but didn't move. You don't have to. I know, but if I stay, we should probably talk about what this is, what we're doing. Ryan's heart rate picked up. What do you want it to be? Real. Whatever that looks like. Not secret, not casual, not something we're testing out to see if it works. Real. She stood up, moved closer to him. I want to take Sophie to her science fair on Friday. I want to have dinner with you both again. I want to integrate into your life instead of existing separately from it. But only if that's what you want too. What about work? The job offer? If we're together and I'm reporting to you, then we figure out the ethics of it. Maybe you report to someone else. Maybe we disclose to HR and let them monitor for conflicts of interest. Maybe I'm overthinking and it's fine. She touched his face, gentle. But I'm not letting the job thing stop this before it starts. Are you? Ryan thought about all the reasons to say no. The complications, the risk, the fact that Sophie was already invested and would be devastated if Ava left, the certainty that he wasn't ready, wasn't healed enough, wasn't capable of doing this without screwing it up. Then he thought about the alternative, going back to his small, safe life, teaching Sophie that fear was stronger than hope, letting the best thing that had happened to him in 3 years slip away because he was too scared to try. No, he said. I'm not letting it stop this. She kissed him, soft and sure, and Ryan kissed her back, his hands finding her waist, pulling her closer. This was different from the kiss behind the fireplace, less frantic, more certain, like they were choosing this instead of being swept up in it. Dad? Sophie's voice came from the hallway. Are you kissing again? They broke apart. Ava was smiling, her face flushed, and Ryan probably looked the same. Yeah, Ryan called back. Yeah, we were kissing. Okay, just wanted to know. The sound of Sophie climbing into bed. Night, Dad. Night, Ava. Night, monster, Ryan replied. Good night, Sophie, Ava added, then looked at Ryan. She really is something. She's the best thing I've ever done. He walked Ava to the door, reluctant to let the evening end. So, Friday. Science fair. I'll be there. 6 o'clock, right? Right. And maybe, if you're not busy Saturday, we could do something, the three of us. Somewhere Sophie wants to go. The zoo, Ava said immediately. She mentioned wanting to see the new penguin exhibit. You remembered that? I told you, I notice everything. She kissed him once more, quick and light. Get some sleep, Ryan, and stop catastrophizing. We're doing this. It's going to be okay. After she left, Ryan stood in the doorway for a long moment, just breathing, just existing in the space between fear and hope. Then he checked on Sophie, found her already half asleep, her favorite stuffed elephant tucked under her arm. Dad, she murmured. Yeah? I like Ava. A lot. Me too, baby. Good, because I think she likes us too. Ryan kissed her forehead. Yeah, I think she does. He went to his own room, pulled out his phone, looked at the photo of Emma that he kept in his private album. Her smile, so familiar it hurt. Her eyes, the same color as Sophie's. Her whole face lit up with the kind of joy that had defined their years together. I'm trying, he whispered to the photo. I'm scared, but I'm trying. I hope that's okay. The photo didn't answer, of course, but somewhere in his chest, in the place where grief and hope coexisted in uncomfortable proximity, Ryan felt something shift. Not forgiveness exactly. There was nothing to forgive. Not permission. Emma was gone. She couldn't give or withhold permission. Just a sense that maybe moving forward wasn't betrayal. Maybe it was the most honest thing he could do. Maybe it was what she would have wanted all along. He fell asleep thinking about Friday, about Ava standing in a school gymnasium watching Sophie's volcano explode, about the way this new possibility was taking shape despite his fear, about how terrifying and necessary it felt to let someone in after spending 3 years behind walls. The week passed in a blur of work and preparation. Sophie practiced her volcano presentation until Ryan could recite it in his sleep. He bought poster board and markers and helped her create a display that explained the science in 7-year-old terms, while secretly Googling chemical reactions to make sure they had it right. At work, things were different and the same. He saw Ava in meetings, professional and distant, but there were moments, a brief smile when their eyes met, a text during lunch asking how the volcano prep was going. That reminded him this was real. They were doing this. Marcus noticed, obviously. You're smiling at your phone. That's new. It's nothing. It's definitely something. You've got the look. What look? The I'm falling for someone and terrified about it, but also kind of excited look. It's very specific. Marcus leaned back in his chair. How's it going? Good. Scary. Both. Yeah, that sounds about right, but you're doing it, which is what matters. He paused. For what it's worth, I think you guys are good for each other. She's less intense around you. You're less ghost-like around her. It works. Ryan wanted to argue, to downplay it, to maintain some kind of professional distance. But Marcus was right. It worked. Terrifying and complicated and absolutely worth it. Friday arrived too fast and too slow. Ryan left work early to pick up Sophie from school, helped her load the volcano into the car with the kind of careful precision usually reserved for transporting explosives. What if it doesn't work? Sophie asked for the 100th time. It'll work. We tested it 3 times. But what if the baking soda is old? Or the vinegar isn't strong enough? Or, Soph, breathe. It's going to be great. You know this stuff inside and out. She nodded, but he could see the nervousness radiating off her. He remembered being her age, remembered the terror of standing in front of people and presenting something you'd worked on, worried they'd find it stupid or wrong or not good enough. Hey, he said gently, you know what Mom used to tell me when I was nervous about presentations? Sophie looked at him, eyes wide. They didn't talk about Emma often, not because it was forbidden, but because it hurt, and Ryan had gotten too good at avoiding hurt. "What?" she asked quietly. "She said the people watching aren't hoping you'll fail. They're hoping you'll succeed. They want your volcano to be awesome because watching awesome things is fun. So just pretend everyone in that room is rooting for you, because they probably are." "Did it work? When Mom told you that?" "Every time." Sophie smiled, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. "Okay, I'll try that." The school gymnasium was already filling up when they arrived, tables set up in rows, each one displaying a different project. There were solar system models and plant growth experiments, and something that appeared to be a robot made from cardboard boxes and hope. Sophie found her assigned table, carefully positioned her volcano, arranged her display materials with the precision of someone setting up a military operation. Ryan stepped back to give her space, checking his phone. A text from Ava. "Running 10 minutes late. Client call went long. Save me a good viewing spot." He texted back. "Front row, center. Can't miss it." Parents filled the gym, admiring projects, taking photos, offering encouragement to nervous kids. Ryan recognized a few other parents from school functions, nodded hello, tried not to look at the door every 30 seconds. Madison's mother appeared beside him. "Ryan, Sophie's volcano looks amazing." "Thanks. She's been working on it all week." "Madison says Sophie has a girlfriend now." The woman's tone was casual, but her eyes were sharp with curiosity. "She has a—" Ryan stopped. "Right. Small children couldn't keep secrets." "She has a friend who's coming to watch, yes." "Madison said she's your boss?" We work together, yes." "How modern." The woman's smile was tight. "Well, good for you, moving on and all that." She walked away before Ryan could formulate a response, leaving him standing there feeling simultaneously exposed and judged. Moving on. Like grief had a timeline, like 3 years was the socially acceptable amount of time to be sad. Like starting to date again was some kind of statement about Emma's significance. "Dad?" Sophie appeared at his elbow. "You're making your worried face." "I'm not worried." "You're worried. Your eye does this thing when you're worried." She demonstrated, scrunching up her face in what was probably meant to be an imitation, but looked more like she was having a sneeze. "I don't do that." "You totally do that. Is everything okay?" Ryan knelt down to her level. "Everything's fine. I'm just proud of you, that's all." "And nervous because Ava's coming and people are going to know you like her?" Sometimes his daughter's perceptiveness was inconvenient. "Maybe a little." "Dad, it's okay if people know. You're allowed to like someone." She said it with the confidence of a child who didn't yet understand how complicated adult relationships could be, how much weight they carried, how many opinions people had about how you were supposed to grieve. "You're right," he said, and meant it. "I'm allowed to like someone." Ava arrived at 6:15, slightly breathless, carrying a small bag. She'd changed from her work clothes into jeans and a blazer, looking polished but approachable, and Ryan felt his heart do something complicated in his chest. "Sorry," she said. "Client call from hell. I got here as fast as I could." "You're here. That's what matters." Sophie ran over, nearly knocking into another student's project in her enthusiasm. "Ava, you made it. Come see my volcano. I named it Mount Sophie." Mount Sophie, excellent choice. Ava followed Sophie to her table, examined the volcano with the attention she probably gave to quarterly reports. "This is impressive work. The paint job is very realistic." "Dad helped with the mountain part, but I did all the science myself." Sophie pointed to her display board. "See, I explained how the chemical reaction works and everything." Parents were watching now, noting Ava's presence, whispering to each other. Ryan could feel their curiosity like a physical weight. Madison's mother was straight up staring, probably already composing texts to share with her book club. Ava either didn't notice or didn't care. She pulled a small box from her bag, handed it to Sophie. "I brought you something, for good luck." Sophie opened the box carefully. Inside was a small piece of actual volcanic rock mounted on a wooden stand with a tiny plaque that read, "Kilauea, Hawaii." "No way," Sophie breathed. "This is real lava rock? From my trip. I thought you might want it for your collection." Sophie threw her arms around Ava's waist, hugging her tight, and Ryan watched Ava's surprise melt into something softer, her arms coming up to hug Sophie back. "Thank you," Sophie whispered. "This is the best thing ever." The presentation started shortly after, each student getting 5 minutes to explain their project. Sophie was nervous. Ryan could see it in the way she kept fidgeting with her display board. But when her turn came, she stepped up to her table with the kind of determination he recognized from Emma. She explained the science clearly, with enthusiasm that was infectious. When it came time for the demonstration, she carefully measured the baking soda and vinegar, poured them into the volcano's chamber, and stepped back. The eruption was perfect. Red-dyed foam bubbled up and flowed down the mountain's sides, pooling on the protective tarp she'd laid out. The audience clapped. Sophie beamed. And Ryan felt pride so intense it was almost painful. Ava was recording on her phone, grinning like this was the most important event she'd ever attended. When Sophie finished and took her bow, Ava started a standing ovation that spread through the gymnasium until everyone was on their feet. After the presentations, during the informal viewing period, Sophie dragged Ava around to see every single project, explaining the science behind each one with varying degrees of accuracy. Ryan followed them, watching his daughter and the woman he was falling for bond over cardboard robots and poorly constructed solar systems. Madison's mother approached again, this time with Madison in tow. "Sophie," Madison said shyly, "your volcano was really good." "Thanks. Your plant project was cool too." The girls ran off to compare notes, leaving Ryan alone with Madison's mother and Ava, who'd circled back to join them. "You must be Sophie's friend," Madison's mother said to Ava with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm Christine, Madison's mother." "Ava Sinclair." Ava shook her hand professionally. "Sophie's mentioned Madison. They seem like good friends." "They are." Christine's eyes flicked between Ava and Ryan. "So how do you two know each other?" "We work together," Ryan said. At the same time, Ava said, "We're dating." Christine's eyebrows shot up. "Oh, how nice." The judgment in her tone was subtle but unmistakable. Ava caught it too. Ryan saw her expression shift slightly, saw her straighten her spine in that way she did when she was preparing for battle. "It is nice," Ava said pleasantly. "Ryan's an amazing father, and Sophie's incredible. I'm very lucky to know them both." "Of course. It's just, well, it hasn't been that long, has it? Since Ryan's wife?" The air went cold. Ryan felt his stomach drop, felt anger and shame and defensive fury all crashed together in his chest. 3 years, he said quietly. "It's been 3 years." "Right, yes. I just meant some people take longer, that's all. Everyone grieves differently." "They do," Ava agreed, and her voice had gone dangerously polite. "Which is why it's fortunate that no one else gets to decide when someone is ready to move forward with their life. That's a deeply personal decision that doesn't require external approval." Christine's smile went brittle. "Of course. I didn't mean to imply—" "I'm sure you didn't." Ava's tone suggested she believed the exact opposite. "If you'll excuse us, I think Sophie's trying to get our attention." She took Ryan's hand, deliberately, publicly, in front of Christine and anyone else who was watching, and led him across the gym to where Sophie was indeed waving at them from beside the refreshment table. Ryan's hand was shaking in Ava's. She noticed, squeezed tighter. "You okay?" she asked quietly. "People are going to judge. They're going to say it's too soon, that I'm being disrespectful to Emma's memory, that I'm confusing Sophie." "Ryan." Ava stopped walking, turned to face him. "I don't care what Christine or anyone else thinks. The only opinions that matter here are yours, mine, and Sophie's. And we're all choosing this, so everyone else can respectfully mind their own business." Sophie appeared with 3 cookies. "I got chocolate chip for everyone. Dad, why do you look upset?" "I'm not upset." "You're making the eye thing again." Ava took a cookie, bit into it thoughtfully. "Your dad is upset because some people think they get to have opinions about his life that they didn't earn the right to." "Like Madison's mom?" Ryan and Ava both stared at her. "She's always judgy," Sophie continued matter-of-factly. "Madison says her mom thinks everyone should do things exactly like she does them, or it's wrong. I told Madison that's silly. There's lots of different ways to do things right." "You're very wise," Ava said. "I know." Sophie took a huge bite of cookie. "Can we go get ice cream now to celebrate?" Ryan looked at Ava, at Sophie, at the gymnasium full of people who had opinions about how he should live his life and when he was allowed to be happy again. He thought about Christine's judgment, about the whispers he could feel following him, about how easy it would be to retreat, to keep Ava separate from this part of his life, to protect himself from other people's opinions. Then he thought about what Ava had said. The only opinions that matter are yours, mine, and Sophie's. Yeah, he said. Yeah, let's get ice cream. They went to a place near Sophie's school that served portions too large for children and played music too loud for conversation. Sophie ordered something with gummy bears and rainbow sprinkles. Ava got plain vanilla, which Sophie declared boring but acceptable. Ryan got chocolate and tried not to think about the looks Christine had given them, the judgment in her voice, the implication that 3 years wasn't enough time to move on. Stop it, Ava said. Stop what? Spiraling. I can see it happening. Your face gets this look like you're running disaster scenarios in your head. I'm fine. Dad's not fine, Sophie announced through a mouthful of rainbow sprinkles. He's worrying about what people think. He does this a lot. Thanks, Soph. Very helpful. I'm just being honest. You said honesty is important. Ava was trying not to smile. She's got you there. Ryan ate his ice cream and accepted that he was surrounded by people who saw through him with uncomfortable accuracy. Maybe that was okay. Maybe being seen, really seen, was better than hiding even if it was more vulnerable. On the drive home, all three of them crammed into Ryan's Honda because Ava had declared she wanted to experience the full family transportation situation. Sophie fell asleep in the back seat, her head resting against the window, the volcanic rock from Ava clutched in her hand like a treasure. She's out, Ava observed. Science fair exhaustion. It's a real thing. Ryan glanced in the rearview mirror at his sleeping daughter. Thank you for coming, for the rock, for standing up to Christine, for all of it. You don't have to thank me for showing up to things I want to show up to. Ava was quiet for a moment, then said, Can I ask you something? Sure. Does it bother you, what Christine said about it being too soon? Ryan considered the question seriously. Yeah, it bothers me, not because I think she's right, but because I'm still figuring out what the right timeline is supposed to be. And having someone else judge my choices makes me second-guess myself. Do you think it's too soon? Sometimes. And then I remember that soon is arbitrary, that I could wait 5 years or 10 years and someone would still have an opinion, that Emma's dead and I'm not, and staying frozen in grief doesn't honor her memory. It just means we're both gone, in different ways. That's very self-aware. I've had a lot of therapy. Turns out grief is complicated and there are professionals who can help you process it. Ava smiled slightly. I should probably get some of that. I'm very good at avoiding feelings. I noticed. Yeah, well, you're very good at catastrophizing, so we make quite a pair. They pulled up to Ryan's apartment building. He killed the engine, looked at Sophie, still asleep in the back. Come up? He asked. Help me get her to bed? Yeah, I'd like that. They managed to get Sophie into the apartment and into her pajamas without fully waking her, a parent-level achievement that Ryan was quietly proud of. Sophie mumbled something about volcanoes and penguins as he tucked her in, then immediately fell back asleep. In the living room, Ava was looking at the photo on the refrigerator, the one of Emma that Ryan couldn't bring himself to take down. She was beautiful, Ava said quietly. Yeah, she was. I'm not trying to replace her. You know that, right? Ryan moved to stand beside her. I know. And even if you wanted to, you couldn't. She was Sophie's mother. She's part of our history. That doesn't go away just because we're building something new. Does Sophie understand that? I think so. We talked about it earlier this week. She said she's okay with this. With us, as long as I'm really choosing it and not just trying it out. She's worried about getting attached if you're going to leave. Ava turned to face him. I'm not planning to leave, Ryan. I'm planning to stay. For as long as you'll let me. Even when it's hard? When people judge us? When my apartment is too small and my car makes weird noises and Sophie has meltdowns about homework? Especially then. I don't want the highlight reel. I want the real thing. She took his hands. Besides, my apartment might be bigger, but it's empty. And my car might be nice, but I drive it alone. And I've never had someone melt down about homework around me because I've never let anyone close enough to be that real. So yeah, even when it's hard. Maybe especially when it's hard. Ryan kissed her then, deep and certain, and felt something inside him finally, fully unlock. All the fear was still there. He wasn't magically cured of anxiety, but it was background noise now instead of the main event. In the foreground was this: Ava in his apartment, Sophie asleep in the next room, the beginning of something that felt terrifying in right and equal measure. When they finally broke apart, Ava was smiling. "So," she said, "zoo tomorrow? You, me, and Sophie? And the penguins." "Obviously the penguins. They're the whole point." Ryan laughed, and it felt good, felt natural, felt like something he was allowed to do without permission or guilt or the weight of other people's expectations. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, let's go see the penguins." After Ava left, Ryan stood in the quiet apartment trying to process everything that had happened. The science fair, Christine's judgment, Ava's fierce defense, Sophie's wisdom about different ways to do things right, the kiss that felt less like starting something new and more like continuing something that had already begun. He pulled out his phone, looked at the photo of Emma again. 3 years. It felt like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once. "I'm doing it," he whispered to the photo. "I'm trying, and I think it's going to be okay." The photo smiled back at him, frozen in a moment of joy that was gone but not forgotten, part of his history but not his entire future. Ryan put the phone away, checked on Sophie one more time, and went to bed thinking about tomorrow. About penguins and possibilities and the terrifying, necessary act of choosing to live instead of just survive. The zoo was crowded on Saturday morning, families everywhere with strollers and excited children, and the kind of controlled chaos that came with corralling small humans near large animals. Sophie held Ryan's hand on one side and Ava's on the other, swinging between them like she'd done this 100 times before, like this was the most natural arrangement in the world. Ryan caught Ava's eye over Sophie's head. She smiled and he smiled back, and for a moment everything was simple. Then Sophie spotted the penguin exhibit and all simplicity evaporated as she dragged them forward with the single-minded determination of a 7-year-old on a mission. "Look, that one's jumping in the water and that one's sliding on its belly. Dad, can we get a penguin?" "No." "But why? I'd take care of it. I'd feed it and everything." "Penguins eat fish, raw fish. You won't even eat cooked fish." "I'd make an exception for my penguin." Ava laughed, leaning against the railing to watch the penguins dive and swim with remarkable grace. "I had the same argument with my brother when I was about your age, except I wanted a dolphin." "What did your parents say?" Sophie asked. "They said dolphins need oceans, not swimming pools. I told them we'd move to the ocean. They were not convinced." "Adults never understand," Sophie said, with the deep resignation of someone who'd faced many such disappointments. "Dad won't let me get a dog either." "We've talked about this," Ryan said. "Our apartment doesn't allow pets." "But Ava's apartment probably does. And if you guys get married, then we'd all live together and I could have a dog, and maybe also a penguin if we're lucky." Ryan choked on air. Ava's eyes went wide. The family standing next to them suddenly became very interested in their conversation. "Sophie," Ryan managed, we're not, "I'm just planning ahead," Sophie said matter-of-factly. "Madison says when grown-ups date, they usually get married eventually, and then I'd have a mom again and also maybe a dog. It's good planning." Ryan wanted the ground to open up and swallow him. Ava looked like she was trying very hard not to laugh or panic, possibly both. "How about we just enjoy the penguins right now?" Ava suggested diplomatically, "and worry about long-term housing arrangements later." "Okay," Sophie agreed easily, already distracted by a penguin doing something apparently hilarious. "But I still want a dog." They moved through the zoo at Sophie's pace, which meant stopping at every exhibit for detailed observation and questioning why lions didn't have manes when they were girls, and whether giraffes' tongues were really that color or if they were stained from eating purple flowers. Ava answered every question with the same seriousness she'd give to a business inquiry, and Ryan watched them together and felt his chest get tight with something that might have been fear or might have been hope. Around lunchtime, they found a spot on the grass near the food pavilion. Sophie ran off to watch some kind of bird show happening nearby, leaving Ryan and Ava alone with sandwiches that cost too much and tasted like cardboard. "So," Ava said, "that was quite a proclamation." "I'm sorry. She's 7. She doesn't have a filter." "I'm not upset, just surprised. I didn't realize she was thinking that far ahead."
Ryan tore his sandwich into small pieces without eating it. She's been without a mother for most of her life. Of course she's thinking about what it would be like to have that again. I don't want her to put that pressure on you, on us. Like you have to fill that role or this doesn't work. Is that what you're worried about? That I'm auditioning to be Sophie's mother? Aren't you, in a way? Ava set down her sandwich, turned to face him fully. Ryan, I'm not trying to replace Emma. I couldn't even if I wanted to. I'm trying to be myself, someone who cares about you and who's learning to care about Sophie. If that evolves into something more parental, great. If it stays as the fun adult who takes her to see penguins and explains volcanic rocks, that's great too. But I'm not performing for a role. I'm just showing up as me. And what if me isn't enough? What if Sophie needs more than that? Then we figure it out. Together. But Ryan, you can't catastrophize every possible future problem before it happens. You'll exhaust yourself trying to prevent things that might never even be issues. He knew she was right. Knew he was doing the thing he always did, borrowing trouble from tomorrow, running disaster scenarios, protecting himself from hurt by expecting it preemptively. It was exhausting, and it was keeping him from enjoying what was right in front of him. Sophie came running back, breathless and full of information about eagles and their hunting patterns. She climbed into Ryan's lap without asking, solid and warm and real, and started eating his neglected sandwich. Can we see the reptile house next? She asked. Sure, monster. And then ice cream? We literally just ate. But by the time we see the reptiles, I'll be hungry again. That's how metabolism works. I learned about it in health class. Ava was definitely laughing now. She makes a compelling argument. You're not helping, Ryan told her. I'm not trying to help. I'm enjoying watching you get out-negotiated by a second grader. The reptile house was cool and dark, filled with glass enclosures housing snakes and lizards, and one particularly large iguana that Sophie declared her new best friend. Ryan stood beside Ava in the artificial twilight, watching his daughter press her face against the glass, talking to the iguana like it could understand her detailed explanation of why reptiles were actually misunderstood. She's something special, Ava said quietly. Yeah, she is. I don't know how I got so lucky. You didn't get lucky. You show up every day, you put in the work. You love her enough to let her be exactly who she is. Ava paused. That's not luck. That's choice. Ryan looked at her. Is that what you're doing? Choosing this? Every day. Even when it's scary. Especially when it's scary. They were standing close enough that Ryan could smell her perfume, could see the way the dim lighting caught in her eyes, could feel the pull between them that had been building since that first conversation in her office weeks ago. He wanted to kiss her, wanted to pull her close and forget they were in a reptile house with his daughter 10 feet away and dozens of other families milling around. Instead, he took her hand, laced their fingers together, let himself have this small thing without needing it to be more. Sophie turned from the iguana exhibit, saw them holding hands, and grinned like she'd won the lottery. You guys are holding hands, she announced to no one in particular. Very observant, Ryan said. Madison's going to be so excited. I'm going to tell her on Monday. Maybe let's not lead with that. Why not? You said we shouldn't be ashamed of people we care about. Ryan didn't have an argument for that. He'd said exactly that 2 weeks ago, when Sophie had been worried about being friends with a kid the others thought was weird. And now his own words were being used against him by a 7-year-old who understood hypocrisy better than most adults. You're right, he admitted. I did say that. So you and Ava don't have to hide. You can hold hands and stuff. It's okay. Ava squeezed his hand gently, and Ryan squeezed back, and they stood there in the reptile house while Sophie returned to her conversation with the iguana, and Ryan felt something fundamental shift inside him. He'd been so focused on protecting Sophie from potential hurt that he'd forgotten kids were resilient, that Sophie had already survived the worst loss a child could face and come out the other side still believing in joy and possibility and love. That maybe she didn't need him to shield her from everything. Maybe she just needed him to show her it was safe to try. The rest of the zoo passed in a blur of animals and ice cream that Sophie had indeed earned through her metabolic arguments, and a gift shop stop where Ava bought Sophie a stuffed penguin despite Ryan's protests that she already had 17 stuffed animals. 18, Ava corrected. And this one's special. This one's from today.
By the time they got back to Ryan's apartment, Sophie was exhausted, the stuffed penguin clutched in her arms, her face still sticky from ice cream. She made it through dinner, leftover pizza reheated in the microwave, and approximately 10 minutes of a movie before falling asleep on the couch. Ryan carried her to bed, tucked her in beside the penguin, and stood in her doorway for a moment just watching her sleep. This small person who'd lost so much and still believed the world was good, who trusted him to make the right choices even when he wasn't sure he knew how. Who'd asked Ava to come to her science fair like inviting love into their lives was the most natural thing in the world. When he returned to the living room, Ava was looking at Emma's photo again. She did that sometimes, not with jealousy or resentment, but with what seemed like genuine curiosity. Like she was trying to understand the woman who'd shaped Ryan's life, who'd given him Sophie, who'd left a hole that could never quite be filled. "Can I ask you something?" Ava said. "Always." "Do you think she'd approve of me, of this?" Ryan moved to stand beside her, studying the photo he'd looked at 1,000 times. Emma smiling, head thrown back, captured in a moment of pure joy that felt like another lifetime. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I think she would." Emma. She was all about living fully, taking risks, not letting fear make your decisions. She would have hated seeing me spend 3 years in survival mode. And she would have liked you. You're smart and direct and you don't take my shit, which are all things she valued highly. I wish I could have met her. Me too. You would have liked her back. Ryan paused, choosing his words carefully. I'm not over her. I don't know if I'll ever be completely over her. She was my first love, Sophie's mother, the person I thought I'd spend my whole life with. That doesn't just go away. I'm not asking it to go away. I know. But I need you to understand that loving you— He stopped, the words catching in his throat. Loving. He'd said it without thinking, and now it was out there, impossible to take back. Ava turned to face him, her expression unreadable. You love me? Yeah, I think I do. Is that too fast? Too soon? She kissed him, cutting off his spiral into panic. When she pulled back, she was smiling. It's not too anything. It's exactly right. Her hand found his face, gentle. I love you too. Even though you catastrophize and overthink and sometimes make that face Sophie was talking about. I don't make a face. You absolutely make a face. It's very endearing. Ryan laughed, and then he was kissing her again, and they stumbled backward onto the couch. A tangle of limbs and half-suppressed laughter, and the kind of desperate relief that came from finally saying the thing you'd been too scared to admit. Stay, he whispered against her mouth. Tonight. Stay. Ava pulled back slightly. Sophie's here. I know. I'm just asking you to stay. Sleep here. Wake up with us tomorrow. Be part of this. She studied his face like she was looking for doubt, for hesitation, for any sign he wasn't sure. Whatever she found must have satisfied her because she nodded. Okay, she said. Okay, I'll stay. They fell asleep on the couch, the TV playing something neither of them was watching, Ava's head on Ryan's shoulder and his arm around her waist. It wasn't perfect. The couch was too small. His arm fell asleep. He kept waking up worried Sophie would find them and have questions. But it was real, and it was theirs. And when morning light filtered through the windows, Ryan woke up feeling something he hadn't felt in 3 years. Happy. Actually, genuinely happy. Sophie found them around 7, already dressed and carrying her stuffed penguin. I knew it, she said, grinning. I knew Ava stayed over. Soph, it's okay, Dad. I'm not a baby. I know adults have sleepovers. She climbed onto the couch beside them. Can we have pancakes? Ryan looked at Ava, who was barely awake and had pillow creases on her face and somehow still looked beautiful. Pancakes sound perfect, Ava said. They made breakfast together, Ryan handling the actual cooking while Ava and Sophie set the table and debated whether chocolate chips counted as a food group. It was domestic and chaotic, and nothing like the carefully controlled life Ryan had built, and it was perfect in its imperfection. Over pancakes, Sophie asked the question Ryan had been dreading. So is Ava your girlfriend now? Ryan glanced at Ava, who raised her eyebrows like your call. Yeah, he said. Yeah, she is. Good, because Madison's been asking and I didn't want to say yes until it was official. Sophie took a huge bite of pancake. Also, Can she come to my soccer game next week? You don't play soccer. I will if Ava comes to watch. Ava laughed. I would love to come to your soccer game when you actually join a soccer team. Deal. The weeks that followed developed their own rhythm. Ava came to dinner twice during the week, always bringing something: flowers for their table, a book she thought Sophie would like, once a bottle of wine that she and Ryan shared after Sophie went to bed while they talked about work and life and the strange reality of falling for each other in the midst of everything else. Ryan took the special projects coordinator position, which came with more responsibility and more stress, but also more money and the chance to actually use his brain for something besides logistics. Ava assigned him to someone else's reporting line to avoid conflicts of interest, and they maintained professional distance at work that everyone saw through anyway. Marcus started a betting pool on when Ryan would officially move in with Ava. Janet from accounting told Ryan he looked happy and to try not to screw it up. The office gossip was relentless and mostly kind, and Ryan stopped caring about it somewhere around week 3. But it wasn't all smooth. There were hard moments, nights when Ryan woke up from dreams about Emma and felt crushing guilt for moving on, moments when Sophie got upset about something small and Ryan realized she was processing feelings about her mother she didn't have words for, times when Ava's work consumed her, and Ryan felt the old fear that she'd realize this was too complicated and leave. The first real fight happened 6 weeks in, on a Thursday night when Ava was supposed to come for dinner but texted at the last minute that she was stuck in a meeting that was running late. How late? Ryan texted back. Maybe an hour? I'm sorry. An hour turned into 2 and then 3. Sophie kept asking when Ava was coming, and Ryan kept checking his phone, and by the time Ava finally texted that she wasn't going to make it, Sophie was already in bed and Ryan was angry in a way that surprised him with its intensity. When Ava called, he answered on the first ring. I'm sorry, she said immediately. The meeting went sideways and I couldn't get away, and you could have called. You could have told me 3 hours ago that you weren't coming instead of making Sophie wait. I thought I could make it. I thought if I just pushed through the meeting, I could. This isn't just about you anymore, Ava. Sophie was excited. She made you a drawing. She kept running to the window looking for your car. Silence on the other end. Then quietly, I know, I messed up. Yeah, you did. More silence. Ryan could hear office noise in the background. Ava was probably still at work, probably exhausted, probably doing her best to juggle everything and failing in the way everyone fails sometimes. I don't know how to do this, Ava admitted, and her voice was smaller than he'd ever heard it. I've spent 10 years making work my priority, and now I'm trying to make you and Sophie priority too, and I don't know how to balance it. I'm going to screw up. I'm probably going to screw up a lot. Ryan's anger deflated. I know, I'm going to screw up too. I already do, constantly. But Ava, you have to communicate. You can't just disappear and expect us to understand. You're right. I should have called earlier. I should have been honest that I wasn't going to make it instead of hoping I could fix it. She paused. Can I come over? Now? I know it's late, but I need to apologize to Sophie. She's asleep. Then I'll apologize to you and to her in the morning. Ryan looked at the clock. Almost 11. He was tired and frustrated and still a little angry, but he also understood what it cost Ava to admit she didn't know what she was doing, to ask for a second chance, to show up even when it was hard. Okay, he said. Come over. She arrived 20 minutes later with takeout from Sophie's favorite Thai place and an expression that was equal parts apology and exhaustion. I brought food, she said, in case you didn't eat. We ate hours ago. Right. Of course. She set the bag on the counter, ran a hand through her hair. I'm not good at this, at being wrong, at admitting I failed. Nobody's good at it, but you have to do it anyway. They stood in his small kitchen, the space between them feeling wider than it should, and Ryan realized this was the first real test, the first moment where the shine of new relationship wore off, and they had to decide if they were going to work through problems or run from them. I need you to understand something, Ryan said carefully. Sophie's been let down by people she loves. First her mother, who didn't choose to leave but left anyway. And I'm terrified of introducing her to someone else who might leave, who might decide this is too hard, who might make promises they can't keep. I'm not leaving. You say that now. But what about when work gets demanding? when Sophie has a meltdown at the worst possible time, when I'm being difficult or scared, or when this stops being fun and starts being work. Ava moved closer, took his hands. Then it's work, and we do the work. Ryan, I'm not going to pretend this is easy because it's not. I'm used to controlling everything, and I can't control this. I'm going to miss dinners. I'm going to screw up. I'm going to prioritize the wrong things sometimes. But I'm not leaving. The screwing up is part of staying. Is it, though? Or are you just saying that because you don't want to be the bad guy? The question came out harsher than he'd intended. Ava flinched. Do you actually think that little of me? She asked quietly. That I'd stay out of guilt instead of choice? I don't know. I don't know what to think. 3 months ago, you were my boss and I was a ghost. Now you're in my kitchen and Sophie's drawing you pictures and I'm terrified that I'm setting all of us up to get hurt. So what do you want to do? End this before it gets harder? Protect yourself by not trying? The challenge in her voice sparked something in Ryan. No, that's the easy way out, and I'm done with easy. I'm asking you to show up, really show up. Not just when it's convenient or when you can fit us into your schedule. All the time. Messy and complicated and imperfect. I can do that. I want to do that. Ava's grip on his hands tightened. But you have to let me fail sometimes. You have to give me room to be human and make mistakes and figure this out as I go. Because if the standard is perfection, I'm going to fail that every single time. Ryan took a breath, let it out slowly. She was right. He'd been so focused on protecting Sophie, protecting himself, that he'd forgotten relationships required risk, required trust, required the willingness to be hurt in exchange for the possibility of something real. Okay, he said. Okay, you're right. I'm sorry. I'm sorry too for missing dinner, for not communicating better, for making Sophie wait. She'll forgive you. She's better at that than I am. Yeah, well, you're getting better at it. 3 months ago, you would have shut down and pushed me away. Now you're just yelling at me, which is progress. Ryan laughed despite himself. Is that what this is? Progress? Absolutely. We had our first real fight, and we're still standing here. That's something. They ordered new Thai food because the first batch had gotten cold, and they sat on his couch eating pad Thai at midnight and talking about how to do this better. Ava promised to be more realistic about her schedule, to communicate earlier when things changed. Ryan promised to trust her more, to not assume the worst every time something went wrong. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start. Sophie woke up the next morning to find Ava in the kitchen making coffee with Ryan, and her face lit up like Christmas. You came! I did. I'm sorry I missed last night. My meeting ran long, and I should have told your dad earlier that I wasn't going to make it. Sophie considered this seriously. Did you apologize? I did. And you brought Thai food? How did you know that? I can smell it. Also, there's containers in the trash. Sophie climbed onto a kitchen chair. Okay, you're forgiven, but next time you have to text if you're going to be late. Deal. And you have to see my drawing. I made it special for you. Ava looked at the drawing, a crayon masterpiece depicting what appeared to be 3 stick figures holding hands under a rainbow. And something in her expression shifted, softened, like she was seeing exactly what this meant, what she'd been invited into, what she stood to lose if she messed this up. This is beautiful, she said quietly. Can I keep it? Yeah. You can put it on your refrigerator. That's what you do with important drawings. Then that's exactly where it's going. The months that followed weren't easy, but they were real. There were more missed dinners and more fights and moments when Ryan's fear threatened to overwhelm his hope. But there were also soccer games that Sophie actually joined a team for. Sunday mornings where Ava showed up with bagels and the crossword puzzle. Movie nights where they all fell asleep on the couch in a tangle of limbs and blankets. Around month 8, Emma's parents came to visit. Ryan had been dreading it, imagining judgment and resentment and accusations that he was replacing their daughter. Instead, Emma's mother took one look at Ava and Sophie playing Go Fish at the kitchen table and said quietly, "She would have wanted this for you." You think so? Ryan asked. I know so. Emma loved you. She would have hated thinking you spent the rest of your life alone because of her. Emma's mother touched his arm gently. It's okay to be happy, Ryan. It's okay to move forward. The permission he didn't know he'd been waiting for settled into his chest like a weight lifting. Emma's parents stayed for the weekend, and by the time they left, Emma's mother had exchanged numbers with Ava and made plans to video call Sophie once a week to hear about school. That went better than expected, Ava said after they'd gone. Yeah, it did. You were worried they'd hate me. I was worried they'd think I was betraying Emma. And I'm learning that loving you doesn't mean I loved her less. It just means my heart's bigger than I thought it was. Ava kissed him then, soft and certain, and Ryan kissed her back and thought about all the ways he'd been wrong about what healing looked like. He'd thought it meant getting over Emma, moving on, leaving the past behind. But really, it meant carrying the past forward, letting it inform but not define him, building new love on a foundation that included loss but wasn't destroyed by it. A year after the retreat at Lake Harmony, Ryan stood in a park with Ava and Sophie, the same park where they'd swung on swings and eaten Thai food at midnight and fought their first real fight. The morning was clear and bright, unseasonably warm for fall, and Sophie was running ahead of them chasing a dog that clearly belonged to someone else. Sophie, that's not your dog, Ryan called. But he could be. He likes me. Liking you doesn't make him yours, Ava laughed. She's persistent. I'll give her that. She's exhausting is what she is. She's perfect. Ryan looked at Ava, this woman who'd somehow seen past his walls, who'd pushed and challenged and refused to let him hide, who'd shown up to science fairs and soccer games and Thai food dinners and middle-of-the-night apologies, who loved his daughter like she was precious, who loved him despite his fear and his grief and his tendency to catastrophize. I have something to ask you, he said. Okay, and it's terrifying, so I need you to just let me say it before I panic and change my mind. Ava's expression shifted. Ryan, move in with us. Not because Sophie wants a dog, though she definitely does, and your building allows pets. Not because my apartment is too small, though it absolutely is. But because I want to wake up next to you every morning. Because I want Sophie to have you as a constant instead of a visitor. Because I love you, and I think you love us, and I'm tired of pretending this isn't forever. Ava stared at him, and for a horrible moment Ryan thought he'd miscalculated, pushed too far, asked for too much. Then she smiled, and it transformed her whole face from composed to incandescent. Yes, she said. Yes, absolutely yes. Sophie, who'd been pretending not to listen from 20 feet away, shrieked and came running back. Does this mean we're getting a dog? It means Ava's moving in with us, Ryan said. So, dog? Ava knelt down to Sophie's level. It means we're going to be a family. Official, real, all of us together. Sophie threw her arms around Ava's neck, and Ava hugged her back, and Ryan watched them and felt his heart do something complicated and wonderful in his chest. What about a dog? Sophie asked again, muffled against Ava's shoulder. We'll talk about a dog, Ava promised. That's not a no, Sophie said to Ryan, triumphant. 3 weeks later, they moved Ava's things into a new apartment, bigger than Ryan's, smaller than Ava's penthouse, with room for Sophie's rock collection and Ava's books, and Ryan's careful collection of memories that included photos of Emma that nobody asked him to take down. 6 weeks after that, they adopted a rescue dog named Captain, who was medium-sized and badly behaved and absolutely perfect, according to Sophie. And somewhere in the midst of packing boxes and arguing about furniture arrangements and teaching Captain not to eat shoes, Ryan realized something fundamental had shifted. He'd spent 3 years believing that moving forward meant leaving Emma behind, that loving again meant betraying what he'd had. But he'd been wrong. Emma was still part of their story. She was in Sophie's smile and her fearlessness and her ability to love without reservation. She was in the framed photos on their wall and the stories Ryan told about her and the way he'd learned to be a father. She was woven into the fabric of who they were, not as a ghost, but as a foundation. And Ava wasn't replacing her. She was adding to their story, building something new that honored what had been while creating what could be. On a quiet evening, 6 months after moving in together, Ryan found Sophie in her room staring at the photo of Emma he'd put on her nightstand, a picture of Emma holding newborn Sophie, both of them looking slightly terrified and completely in love. "You okay, monster?" he asked. "I was just thinking about Mom. Is that weird?"
Not even a little bit. He sat down beside her on the bed. What were you thinking? That I wish she could have met Ava. I think they would have been friends.
Sophie looked up at him. Is it okay that I love Ava? Like, not the same as I would have loved Mom, but still love? Ryan pulled her into his lap, held her close. It's more than okay. It's beautiful. You know what Mom would say if she were here? What? She'd say that love isn't a limited resource, that you loving Ava doesn't take anything away from your love for her, that hearts are big enough to hold all kinds of love, all at the same time. Did she really say that? She said something like it once, when we were talking about having kids. She said every child parents have doesn't split their love in half. It multiplies it, makes it bigger. Ryan kissed the top of Sophie's head. I think the same is true for all kinds of love. Loving Ava doesn't mean I loved Mom less. It just means I'm brave enough to love again. Are you scared? Every day. But I'm learning that being scared doesn't mean you stop trying. It just means it matters enough to be scary. Sophie nodded against his shoulder, and they sat like that for a while, holding each other in the quiet space where memory and present existed together without conflict. When Ava found them later, she didn't interrupt. She just leaned against the door frame and watched. And when Sophie finally noticed her, she held out one arm in invitation. Ava crossed the room and joined them, and the three of them sat together on Sophie's bed, surrounded by stuffed animals and rock collections and the beautiful, messy reality of a family that had been broken and rebuilt into something new. That night, after Sophie was asleep and Captain was snoring on his dog bed and the apartment was finally quiet, Ryan and Ava stood together on their small balcony looking out at the city lights. Thank you, Ryan said. For what? For being patient, for pushing me when I needed pushing, for loving Sophie, for loving me even when I was too scared to love you back properly. Ava leaned into his shoulder. You love me back just fine. You just needed time to trust it. Do you ever regret it? Taking on all this? You could have had someone easier, someone without a kid and trauma and a dead wife's photos on the wall. I could have had easier. I didn't want easier. I wanted real. She turned to face him, put her hands on either side of his face. You and Sophie, you're the realest thing in my life. Everything else is just work and obligations and things I do because I'm supposed to. But this? Us? This is what I actually want. Even when it's hard, especially when it's hard, easy doesn't change you. Hard does. Ryan kissed her, deep and slow and certain, and thought about all the ways they'd changed each other. How she'd pulled him out of survival mode and taught him to live again. How he'd shown her what it meant to be part of something bigger than herself. To care about people more than achievement. How they'd both learned that love after loss was possible, was beautiful, was worth every terrifying moment of risk. I love you, he said against her mouth. I love you too. Even when you make that face Sophie's always talking about. I don't make a face. You absolutely make a face. They stood on the balcony arguing about faces and laughing and watching the city exist below them, and Ryan felt something he'd thought he'd lost forever. Complete. Not because Ava had filled Emma's space, that space would always exist, would always be part of who he was, but because he'd learned that hearts could hold multiple truths at once, that he could grieve what he'd lost and celebrate what he'd found, that Sophie could love her mother's memory and love Ava's present, that moving forward didn't mean leaving the past behind. It meant carrying it forward, letting it inform, but not imprison. 3 years earlier, a coffee mug had shattered on an office floor, and Ryan's carefully controlled world had cracked open. He'd been terrified then, convinced that letting anyone in would destroy what little stability he'd built. He'd been wrong. Letting Ava in hadn't destroyed him, it had rebuilt him, had shown him that protection wasn't the same as living, that walls kept out pain but also kept out joy, that the risk of loving was always, always worth it. Because at the end of every terrifying moment of vulnerability, every fight they'd worked through, every time he'd wanted to run and chose to stay instead, there was this, a family that hadn't existed a year ago. A daughter who was learning that love could grow instead of only being lost. A woman who'd chosen them despite every reason not to. A life that was messy and imperfect and more beautiful than anything he could have planned. Emma would have wanted this for him. He knew that now. She would have wanted him to find love again, to give Sophie a full life, to understand that honoring her memory didn't mean staying frozen in grief. And somewhere in his chest, in the place where he carried her still, Ryan felt a kind of permission he'd been seeking all along. Not to forget her, he never would. Not to replace her, that wasn't possible. But to live. Fully, messily, imperfectly. To build a future that honored the past without being defined by it. Inside the apartment, Sophie called out that Captain was eating her homework, and could someone please handle this situation? Ava laughed and went to investigate, and Ryan followed them both inside, closing the balcony door behind him. This was his life now. Dog-eaten homework and bedtime negotiations, and a woman he loved standing in his kitchen trying to convince a medium-sized rescue dog to drop the math worksheet. This was what he'd been too scared to want, too broken to believe possible. And it was perfect in its imperfection, real in its messiness, everything he'd needed and hadn't known how to ask for. Ryan Carter had spent 3 years surviving, but now, finally, terrifyingly, beautifully, he was living. And that made all the risk, all the fear, all the vulnerable moments of choosing hope over protection absolutely worth it. Because love, he'd learned, wasn't about the absence of fear. It was about choosing to try anyway. About believing that what you might gain was worth more than what you might lose. About trusting that even broken hearts could heal, could open, could hold more than you ever thought possible. And his heart, broken as it had been, was bigger now than it had ever been before. Big enough for memory and presence, for grief and joy, for everything he'd lost and everything he'd found. Big enough for all of it, finally, completely, beautifully big enough.